Hello there, great person, and welcome back to Let's Finally React to Warhammer 40k again. You've all been asking for this video for some time now. Today we do Chaos Gold's Time and the Warp. And of course, as a physicist, I will try to do my best to give you some information about what is feasible, what is just fantasy, and what is perhaps sci-fi that is possible. So today we start with Luetin's video. We will probably finish it as well. It's 1.5 hours long, but we will get through it, have some fun with it, and I hope you have all been well. There will be more Warhammer 40k again. From now on, I was just, I fell into the Frieren hole, so I plan on watching one episode of Frieren a month, and I just binged it, and it was awesome. So that's why kind of all the other content stopped a bit. But it's a very good show, so you should check it out if you like very, very philosophical, thought-provoking shows. Check out Frieren. And if you like this video, of course, don't forget to like and subscribe and all the good stuff. Comment on what you thought of this, and we will just have some fun now with Luetin's Warhammer Dark Origins Part 1. Here we go.
Doch ich frag mich, wer wir sind.
So let's see what Luetin has for us today. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
This great evil.
This great evil.
How did it steal into the world? What seed? What root did it grow from?
Ooh, interesting.
Who's doing this? Who's killing us?
Oh, holy shit. Okay. Let's go back.
Robbing us of life and...
So this great evil, where does it come from? This is really eldritch. I already love it to death. It's an interesting question. What seed, what root did it grow from? Was there a root, or was it there forever? Because I always thought the warp was there before the world, and it will be after the world ends. Or perhaps it's the same as the world, but just another layer, so it's existing as long as the universe is. I don't know, so yeah.
Who's killing us?
But this who's killing us, marvelously done.
Life and light, mocking us with the sight of what we might have known. Does our ruin benefit the earth? Does it help the grass to grow? The sun to shine?
Ooh, interesting. Yeah, like, would it be good if humans went away, or if the warp corrupted everything and took over the planet? Like, what does that mean? Like, if the planet survives for longer, perhaps it's better for the planet. Who knows? What an interesting thought.
Is this darkness in you too?
Ooh, yes.
Will you pass through this night?
I love it, the darkness of men. Ooh, I probably will have to mute this, but it is an awesome melody. Ooh, what is that? Is that an Eldar? The Emperor. And schism in the warp.
The certainties within the Imperium of Man that we can hold on to in the 41st millennium are sparse. Soon, we will explore some of the more tangible forces and organizations in the Imperium. What I want to embark upon is a 3-part exploration of the darker and more shadowy places that are, by any reasonable standards, far beyond our comprehension. Ancient history, lost knowledge, paranoid rumors, and outright heresy infects the minds of mortal beings. The gnawing desire to gaze upon something that should not and cannot exist. The impossible sight of creatures alone would be enough to cause the strongest minds to lose their footing and the weakest to be tossed carelessly into the void.
That is so interesting. What do you think? Is it better to try, like... Because every time you explore, you might stumble upon something that's terrible and beyond your comprehension, and that might end everything you know. Like, for example, when they built the H-bombs, they actually did not know if they would ignite the whole atmosphere of the planet, killing every living thing, almost every living thing at least, that needed the atmosphere to live. And that's something like this, like, how far can exploration go? And do you think it's always worth it? Like, when is it not worth it? I would love to know that from you. So tell me in the comments.
This would be
That's
to
cool.
succumb
What a
to mortal
cool thought.
weakness and endure death. Those few who are approved to explore beyond the boundaries of that which exists, beyond the worlds of mankind, such as Imperial Inquisitors, rogue traders and Mechanicus, may attempt or mistakenly happen upon the origins of the abyss of horror that is the Immaterium. Curiosity may creep in, and you may try and piece together the shattered remnants of Eldar mythology, or observe and uncover the ancient, seemingly ruined or abandoned tombs of these strange Xenos constructs known as the Necron or Necrontyr. Few answers are ever to be found, answers that are ultimately more likely to reveal a further endless sea of questions than gift you a glimmer of truth.
I love that though. It's one of my favorite tropes in horror as well. It's so weird, like when I watch a horror movie where they explore some unknown ruins or something, and because it's a horror movie, some asshole creature is gonna come and kill them all. Almost all, save for the protagonist. That's how it goes normally. But I love I love those things also for the mystery behind them. Like, what did the authors think of the things beyond? Like what do the authors think these aliens did, or why are they there, or what secrets do they guard, or what terrible experiments by whom were these aliens they find, or the machines they find? You know what I mean? It's so incredibly interesting to me. That's why I hate Prometheus a bit, because it tried it and failed, the movie by Ridley Scott. What a shame. That had so much potential.
What is the nature of chaos and its immortal entities? How did it come to be? The Eldar have seen such things come to pass, and they know this too painfully and too deeply. They have felt its power and learned that it cannot be contained or corralled. What are the Necron, the most ancient of races, their own history, a tragedy, but who similarly know all too well what awaits them in the realm of the infinite void?
The Necron, though, are very interesting in this regard, because the Necron themselves don't know their lore. I think that's the thing. Because I read The Infinite and the Divine, and there was a huge plot point about, I think it was Trazine. It was Orican or Trazine. One of the two had false memories. I think it was Orican. Or was it Trazine? I think it was Trazine. He had false memories about the time before they were molten into these constructs. And so we can't even be sure that the Necron history we know is the real one. That's so terribly scary as well.
Some might reasonably wonder how such a place which apparently ignores the laws which we know to constrain and govern our reality could have such severe impacts on the events that take place within our mortal linear perception of time. How can this occur, and why?
Yeah. What's the
Now,
warp?
firstly, I'll say this series has a longer than usual introduction, and in each of them there may be more explanations of details, some sourced and some necessary logical assumptions, but please understand, I feel that it's necessary this time to just lay out all my thinking.
Yes, please do. I love that. That's very valuable. I do that in every reaction, basically, what he's trying to do here. Like, every time I pause something, like I try to lay out my thinking at the moment, because the worlds become so much more rich and logical by doing that. I don't know, I really like it. So let's see how he does it. I can't wait.
Later, I may break this down into smaller edited versions that focus more strictly on the narrative elements or individual explanations, but the goal of this three-part exploration is mainly to understand what's happening in the big picture. Now, this all started with me asking the question, how did the Chaos Gods come into being? From our point of view, when? Yet this initial starting point ended up expanding over the past few weeks into becoming a sprawling look at the warp, its history, and how we reconcile it with our own reality. Chaos.
Let's see how much he actually knows and how much he thinks he knows. Because as far as I know, the times before humanity at least are very much shrouded in mystery and guesses. So
the Eldar, the Old Ones, the Necrontyr, and the War in Heaven. I also will be assuming that if you're watching this, you have already watched my previous video about Chaos or the 40k primer. If you haven't, I recommend watching these first and then joining this series, but if you want to stay here, I will eventually explain through all the details either way. In this first video, we'll be looking at understanding more about chaos.
Yes,
how time
please.
is a problematic component of how we relate to chaos and
Ooh,
it to
time.
us through the war. In the second video, I'll be exploring the beginnings of the galaxy, the old ones, Necrontyr, Necron, and Eldar gods.
Yeah, we
as the
know
war
that
in
already.
heaven.
We know
and
that.
lastly, we'll be concluding with my best assessment on how all these pieces fit together to bring us the origins of the Chaos Gods and even some other curious details about other races and the history of the galaxy. It has
Yeah. I don't know if I should do the other two. Like, I know War in Heaven pretty well. I assume I know it pretty well. And the other stuff, I think I also know quite some stuff about. So I might only do this part, but
has been, I don't mind telling you,
let's see.
mentally exhausting.
Teach. Or
As I always
Teach's
say,
Lieutenant
this is
here.
my personal best effort, but short of rereading every piece of official material
Oh, hello,
ever written,
Mechanicus
I'm not
man.
infallible. What I've put into these 3 videos are my best explorations of the issue, and I always base this on sourced material first and logical speculations second.
That's
when I
good.
use a source or reference to validate a theory or understanding, I always use material that is as reasonably recent as possible and not excessively contradicted. I then cross-reference these
okay,
things
that's
with other
good.
sources as best that I can. The reason I wanted to make this clear from the outset is because the topics we'll be looking at can bring out a lot of dissenting opinions. Many people consider some of the origin narratives to be closed cases and definitive, when they are.
Yeah, I got that much already from the videos in the community that I heard about. Like, I didn't experience it firsthand, really, but I know there's some debate about some of the core mythological elements, so to speak, of the Warhammer 40k universe.
They are in
I mean,
actuality anything
that's
but.
how it is if
Now,
you have
I've
so
dug
much
in
literature
deep
on it,
this one,
and
so I
games
will
and
say
stuff.
this: if you disagree with my opinion, or if you feel that you have a piece of reasonable official reference that sheds light upon something, please note that reference with a title and preferably a rough page reference, and if you can, a quote in context. Now, I say this because you would not believe
Who
the
would
amount
do
of
it?
speculative
Who would do
opinions
that?
that are all floating around, often with no sources backing them up, but then becoming seemingly commonly accepted. Yet, when put under scrutiny, not only fail the logic test, but fail to materialize in any reasonable
Oh
fashion
god, one of those
within the
things.
source material. So I do get a little bit more pedantic these days about people saying, I read somewhere. Well, if you read it somewhere, go find it and then tell us where you read it.
Wow, he seems pretty salty here. Why? What happened, Luetin? I don't know what happened to you, mate, but you seem to have had quite some arguments about stuff that is obviously already solved or something. But I actually don't mind the community coming up with their own understanding of something, even if it's not in the lore. It's kind of what I talked about a bit in other videos before, this transformative part of a story that happens when the community gets its grips on it and transforms it into something most people agree on. I think that's also valuable, so I really like that. But if it contradicts the lore, it's always, yeah, what's better, the community version or the original one? Because we always have to keep in mind the original one is written by presumably 1 or 2 people. The community version is probably like accepted by at least 1,000 or 20,000 or something. So I don't know. You could make an argument that the community version is better, though. If he says there are logic errors, I believe him, and then it's
As you
obviously
guys have
not
seen
good.
the addendum I made regarding the Emperor Part 3, I'm always open to listening to and shifting opinions. For me, I care about coming to the best conclusions possible, but if you can't provide a source, it's hard to give it much credibility. As I said, just stating that I think I read this somewhere one time, it doesn't cut it.
Yeah, I agree,
Trust but
though,
verify?
generally.
You should all know by now that I'm a big supporter of people wanting to write, for example, fan fiction, or to speculate heavily on events within 40k. It's fun, it's really interesting, and to me that's what 40k is all about. I spent forever, when I was younger, writing my own background material. However, for me, that fan fiction or that speculation should be done within the logical understanding of the existing framework, because otherwise...
Yeah, I 1,000% agree. I've not read many fan fictions in my life. I've read one about Ocarina of Time when I was like 12 and I didn't even understand what it was. I thought it was official. Didn't understand what fan fiction was, so I thought it was a cool official story that took place after Ocarina of Time directly. And I also once read Harry Potter and the I don't know, something about logic, where Harry Potter grows up not with Vernon but with a professor, and like he goes all scientist in Hogwarts. That was very much a lot of fun, but I dropped it as well because then it got weird, convoluted. But yeah, like it a lot. But he's right. You should, if you do fan fiction, try your best at least to keep it in the lore, or otherwise, I don't know. You should mark it beforehand. Like say, yeah, this is very like heavy fan fiction. I don't know. Are there genres of fan fiction like in universe and parallel universe or something? Probably. I don't know.
You're just making
Sorry.
up random nonsense. Random nonsense
Random
like I used
nonsense.
to as a kid. For example,
Yeah.
my Chaos Lord, who was half fly with 4 molecular acid hands, would be able to grab hold of Imperial Guardsmen and literally hug melt them to death. Or
It
my other
sounds fun
Chaos
though.
Lord, who could absorb the souls of enemies and basically never die on the battlefield, gaining wounds from their souls. It's all fun stuff as a kid, but it's also
Yeah.
game-breaking madness that if you try and put into actual context can undermine, muddy the water in regard to everything else. Although I
Wow, that's such a good point as well in writing. When you write these Eldritch and Lovecraftian, let's say Lovecraftian entities, you have to be careful because theoretically they could just think one thought and everything you build up is dead and gone in the story because they're so powerful, which they should be, like if you write them correctly. So when I write these Eldritch horror beings, like there's always I always have to have an explanation in my mind why they don't just wipe out everything and why it's not like, oh, they encountered, they're dead. Like there has to be a very good reason because otherwise it is indeed game breaking. And in a setting like this, game breaking stuff can happen so quickly. Like also with this, we had this in the weapons video, the celestial orrery or something that the Necron have. That's game breaking, pretty much, if it's the way it is described in that video. Or we have, what was the other thing? This DMAT gun that takes you out of existence. Like, that's game breaking. You have to be very careful with that. And you also have to be careful not to undermine human conflicts with these eldritch conflicts. Because there's one thing to have humans or humanoid creatures battle it out on a battlefield with, like, a feeling of realism in that it could be a normal battlefield nowadays, but like it's future, more technology a bit, but it's basically the same ideas we have today. Or it is a battle against eldritch forces, which is completely different. Like, how do you even write that? Like, if you know my horror stories, you know that Volume 2 is about a war between eldritch beings in the background of the stories. And that's hard, man. It's so hard to write because those stories are basically about humans encountering this war and like or like battlefields of this war, and they just don't know what the fuck is going on, and weird stuff happens. And I chose that because that was like, if eldritch beings battle and humans are just observing it, like they are at least not the target. So that was my solution to this problem. But Warhammer has other solutions, I think, like this belief, like people have to believe in it in a certain area or something, I think. But we will probably learn more about that today. So
I did really
let's
love
see.
my crazy acid hand melting flyman because he was brutal. So these videos may be a little bit more substantive than a visual narrative, and I often try to marry the two things together. But
Yeah,
in these
I
two
know you
videos,
do.
you may have to forgive me if they are on the lighter side of visual editing. I know I
That's
often see
fine.
comments from you guys saying, Luetin, this is your most
Ooh,
complex video,
that
or
is
this one has
cool.
eclipsed the other. Well, trust me when I say that these 3 videos are my most complex. They have been far more taxing than anything else I've tackled before,
Ooh,
which is why it's
intriguing,
taken me 3
friend.
weeks. Primarily because they required so much extra referencing, cross-referencing, philosophical exploration, or just trying to form the narrative around scientific understanding.
Man, now you're hyping me up. Now you have to deliver, mate. The physicist sitting here, also like bit of a philosopher, psychologist as well. So let's see what you deliver. yeah, I think he will do fine. I love him.
That
He's
I'd
such a
barely
cool
read about
guy. I
before.
can't
I
wait
didn't
for
quite
this.
reach
This
the
is so
point
hype.
of writing things all over the walls and windows, but it was getting close. And
Yeah.
there are multiple aspects that have to be factored in. For example, the all too often heavily fragmented and shrouded ancient history of the oldest races in the galaxy. The
Yeah.
needs to reconcile issues of causality, having to balance and make sense of continually contradicting sources, while also picking through and deciding how trustworthy a source is, their bias or their
Ooh,
agenda,
that
or if
monster
their
looks like a
characterization or use
fuckface.
of terminology is even correct. Ultimately, it becomes very difficult to select which pieces of the puzzle are the ones you need. The deeper you start
Yeah.
thinking about it, the more it becomes like falling into an endless void of confusion. Much
Oh god. I got that feeling when I started doing the explanation videos on the oldest view and the Frieren one. I fell into this hole of like things clicking and not clicking and puzzling together stuff. I think those two are my best videos. But man, I was like getting mad doing them because like I dropped into this huge lore hole. So I think I know what he's feeling here. Like, oh god.
of the information we have to work from, despite what some will always try to claim, is regularly extremely vague. While some things may appear or are collectively assumed to be near certainties, but then when you actually go and read the specific source yourself, the reality then calls into question your original understanding or may even render it no longer relevant. The reality is that in 40k at this stage there are so many references that some get pushed aside into the shadows. With all of that in mind, I think it's important to say that no matter what you might read or hear, things are very rarely definitively retconned in 40k, because that
Yeah.
just isn't how the universe of 40k works.
Yeah, I
The
get
very
that.
often deliberately vague nature of 40k and its constant contradictions, which despite what some would often suggest are often meant to exist as well as previous information, not to automatically replace what came before. This reality
Yeah, it's the thing we've discussed before that all the 40k lore is basically in-universe documents, so to speak. So they contradict each other by nature because that's how it is. Sometimes historic documents contradict each other, and you have to figure out what the truth was, or what the best truth was, so to speak. It's a harsh thing. So love that it's the case here, and I love that he reminds us of that. Yeah.
of visible contradictions, I think, just becomes intolerable for some people. And personally, I sympathise with this to a degree. It can be very annoying when you just want to know what the hell actually happened. But
Yeah.
this is what 40k is, and it has been for decades. Regardless, though, of how any of us may want things to be, the actual reality is that usually lore elements are not immediately retconned, but instead they are slowly moved sideways and made less visible until they reach their
Interesting.
new accepted alignment. And that new position very well could be something actually being retconned. But when I say slowly, I mean 10 years, not 6
Interesting.
months. During that process of realignment, everything related to that description appears as an overlapping, blurry, multiple exposure where
Ooh,
all
I love
things
it.
seem possible.
That's
and
so
worse,
cool.
even when it has been realigned, it's still going to be there, which is confusing for some people.
Yeah,
So if you ever
I get
read
that.
someone
Oh,
saying,
sorry. Again, I was confused by this picture, which is just so awesome. Look at this, guys. Chaos probably. What is this? Chaos versus Necron? I mean, we've got the Necron technology in the background, so very
that
cool
this
stuff.
has been retconned since forever, don't necessarily trust it. Not until you go and look actually for yourself, or you find someone else listing a source for you. Because people misremember things very, very easily, or they just choose to stick with their own version of events because they know most others aren't going to be bothered to go and look up what it is
Yeah,
they're saying.
perhaps.
Or that
And we've got another fuckface in the background.
they don't
but
have the
yeah.
ability to go and look up what they're saying. Now, I am not one of those people because I will go and spend an hour or more looking because these fragments of information formulate the whole picture. And I'll tell you now, if I had £1 for every person I'd read stating adamantly that their source was unquestionably correct, because 90% of the time it's either just not there or a very, very loose, vague quote that could be interpreted in any number of ways.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that happening. I can see that happening. Also, how does he find all the sources? Like, does he have every lore piece? Like, does he have all the books and stuff? I can see it, but like, I would love to know that from him. did he do a Q&A one day? I would love to watch that, like on my own probably, but because I would love to know, like, because he obviously is probably one of the most passionate people about this universe that exists, and he really is like a scholar, you know, like he knows his stuff. And I wonder how like, does he have a network of people having access, or how does it work?
Now, as I said in my recent discussion about the Emperor of Man and using specific individual quotes from sources, how do you trust a source? Is one statement from one character good enough? What about if that statement is vague? What if there is another character somewhere else who contradicts it? Does newer automatically mean more correct? You might assume so, but in 40k, that's not necessarily true. What about...
Welcome to being a historian, my friend. That's the problem they all have. A good friend of mine recently accomplished her PhD in history, and she told me a lot about this stuff he's talking about here. And like, if you think history is clear, yeah, like the rough strokes I think are clear, but there's a lot of stuff that's also not clear that they present as clear, and it's like this. So
what if something is really vague but also repeated in other places but equally vaguely? How about if something's actually very clear and specific, but wait, the person delivering the source is questionable, or maybe they've got a bit of a dodgy agenda?
yeah,
You can see how this quickly makes things far from what you would call certain. In fact, it's not even a certainty on how lore should be delivered. Some would prefer that things are all delivered very clearly in a specific timeline, with details that ensure no contradictions occur, with concrete established events and
no, it
parameters.
doesn't fit the universe,
On the other hand,
I
there
think.
are those who have been writing the lore and are part of Games Workshop for decades who would argue that this is exactly the wrong way to go about things.
Yeah,
In fact,
it is,
should
I think.
always be vague and unclear and questionable.
It also is a great possibility to insert new lore. You can just have a person be like, yeah, but I heard it differently, and then it's new. Like, I like it. Like, you're not... I think Doctor Who did that mistake a bit, because in Doctor Who there are some canon-breaking things as well, because it ran for over 60 years, of course. And yeah, that's like... The longer something runs, the more the people need to know, like... The longer something runs, the bigger the volume of things people need to know, so to speak. You know what I mean? And if you have this, like, you can also be like, if you forgot something or if you haven't read the source, it's okay. Like, you can just fall back to this as well. I like that. It's very fair to the writers as well.
It was meant to be a starting point for people like us to make our own interpretations. And I know that from reading so many of your comments, people have their own theories, their own speculations, all of which are greatly imaginative. And that's fine depending on a certain person's point of view. The events and timeline of Warhammer 40,000 slowly come into clarity for us as time passes. But we should also remember, this is not a battle over who is right and who is wrong.
Yeah, it's not.
It's an ever-developing history that rightly will seek to correct and adjust the events and figures within it to organically allow for more expansion and development. It'd be crazy to assume that something conceptualized decades ago would be forever set in stone, yet at the same time, maintaining continuity is always important to ensure the narrative stays true to its origins and is not horribly bastardized or warped by outside influences. It's also worth mentioning and remembering that where we gather this information is usually from official sources like codex or supplements, except some of these vary greatly in how much information they give. Very often the first edition, which is the period from 1987 to 1993, and third edition 1998 to 2004 give us some of the most detailed descriptions, second edition to a degree. It's often surprising how across the years very little details have been updated. And this is what leads to people saying that if it was written so long ago, how can that continue to be true today? Well,
what? But if it's there, it's the basis. Like, you just work like it's just the base, and you build on top of it. Obviously, like
you would be surprised. For example, there are things from 3rd edition that are only mentioned once in very small sections, which have been used to continue the narrative into 8th edition. So it's simply wrong to say that things from this time are no longer relevant. This idea
who would say that? What? That's so dumb.
Can never apply.
Also, we've got a new Chaos asshole.
Incorrect. Now, I personally consider anything from 3rd onward to be relatively viable, at least worthwhile of being investigated and cross-referenced. 1st and 2nd are pretty questionable, but a lot of it still continues to be true. But anyway, if we get into talking about that, it could fill a video all on its own. So with all that said, let's get started.
Yes, please. So the first among them
So
is
let's begin
corn.
with the thinking that stems from the original texts, where the description alludes to the chaos gods arising to full consciousness during the Middle Ages of mankind. Now, before anybody starts writing out some long theory about how they all started during the war in heaven, calm down, okay? We're only just getting started here.
Yeah, I've heard him reference this, and I think it does not fit. Like, no, it does fit that they might have risen in that time, but not because of the Middle Ages. That would be weird, because there are so few
Because
people.
when this was originally written, the world-ending wars of the wars in heaven during the early days of the galaxy were not part of the narrative, and the event that would begin to be gently suggested in 2nd edition is now part of the official established background. And for that reason, many people very reasonably consider the original descriptions from 1st edition to no longer be the official origins of the Chaos Gods. However,
Yeah, I mean, I agree, because I've heard, like, that is like a part of the history I think I know most about. Like, I know, like, I'm still a noob, but I know a lot about the War in Heaven because I love Necrons so much, and I read up on them, like, for example, by the Infinite and Divine, and I watched some lore videos about them and stuff like that, and I think it's a lot more sensible to also have the Chaos Gods creation on the universal or galactic scale, at least, because otherwise it makes humanity too important in the grand scheme of things, and it gives them this importance that I don't like. I want humans just to be a race in the universe and having just to fight, because it's a harsh, cruel world. You know what I mean? But I don't know.
this is not at all as clear-cut as simplistically saying the war in heaven was huge and really bad, and therefore the Chaos Gods must have originated during that time. As I said, far too often people want things to be very nice and simple and neat, to be absolute or definitive in 40k.
Also, birth. As far as I know, all the Chaos Gods are always there. Like, they are just not, perhaps you could call it sentient or whatever you call it, or like active or something. The way I understood it always was like the Chaos Gods are slumbering, or are like subconsciously there, because the emotions associated to them are not that strong in the universe. And when they search, like, they get a spark and they like go haywire. You know what I mean? I always thought about it like that, so.
Most of the time, they simply are anything but. It is always true, some things are fairly set in stone, some things are very, very clear indeed. 40k by its very deliberate nature is clouded, vague, and regularly lacking in detail. So let's just get straight into things with a graphic and unpleasant example. Now, I see all the time people continue to try and argue that Nurgle is and must be the oldest Chaos God. And people seem happy to argue this, despite the fact that it is contradicted in most, if not all, the Chaos Codex.
Yeah, I never got that feeling as well. Also, I love Nurgle. Oh, I should have put my Nurgle background on.
As is often the case, this has somehow arisen from, I think, unintentional community confusion, partly by mixing up or conflating fantasy lore with 40k lore. And I know some people think that it overlaps, and I will say I am open to that being the case, if only to a small degree. But even if it does overlap, it's irrelevant to the 40k timeline. The other most common talking point is the fundamental misunderstanding around the term Grandfather Nurgle, which is then equated as simply meaning Nurgle is the oldest. This is excessively simplistic and also just entirely wrong.
Yeah, that
the
really sounds
Grandfather
simplistic.
Nurgle term is just descriptive of Nurgle's character as a chaos god. It has nothing at all to do with age. It stems from Nurgle having what's described as a more personal touch, that he watches over his followers like a doting patriarch.
Yeah.
Typhus, formerly of the Death Guard, now Herald of Nurgle, gives us a good example as he observes in the novel Plague War an unfortunately graphic description of an Imperial human portmaster suffering this personal attention of Nurgle.
This is gonna be horrific, let's go.
And he delights as Nurgle ruins the poor man over and over, decomposing and recomposing him whilst keeping him alive, and in a fashion only that could be described as obscene horror, his body rotting, flesh tearing, splitting, bursting, and so on.
God,
so extreme that even Typhus, who has seen his fair share of ravages before, is overcome and stands in awe, observing with grim fascination how the Lord of Decay is giving such attention to his suffering. Typhus watches as the following unfolds to the wretched portmaster. Bloody pus was pouring from his choking throat. The portmaster twitched. He was still alive and moaning as his body folded itself almost perfectly in half. Under normal circumstances he would have died, but Grandfather Nurgle is kind and wishes all those who are afflicted by his gifts to fully enjoy the experience. And so the man's soul remained confined within his body. His eyes rolled madly even as they bloomed with cataracts and sank in upon themselves. His lips split and his tongue turned black and fell from his mouth to writhe away like a salt-bathed slug. Stinking slurry pooled around him, his bowels leaked, bladder inflated and burst. Still the man lived. The spectacle of rapid decay played out before Typhus's eyes, and he watched fascinated. The sheer variety of death Nurgle meted out was a glory in itself, and this was the finest Typhus had witnessed in some time.
What the fuck, Typhus?
Truly blessed by Nurgle. Such fecundity, decay, such colour, such fertile ground for life you've become. Know this, little man. Few of your kind experience such exquisite extinctions, and fewer still are permitted to see the cornucopia of rebirth your mortal shells permit. You are favoured.
The description gets continually worse, by the way. You can find it for yourself if you want to read the whole thing. But essentially, the grandfather term is all to do with this kind of attention from the
it's a patron.
The god of plague. It's all about Nurgle's personality and his characteristics as a power. Nurgle's followers, like Typhus, are often enraptured by observing the beauty and artistry of decay. And just to repeat myself, it has nothing to do with any birth order in the warp, or growth or sentience of origin. It's simply a characterization among his followers. So now I've put away that one for you straight away. It's worth as well mentioning that from 6th to 8th edition, that's 2012 until now, the description regarding the ordered origin of the Chaos Gods has been almost word for word the same, and the order through all of the codex has been pretty much again the same. Since the dawn of time, these tides and waves have flowed unceasingly through the mirror realm of the warp, and such is their power that they formed creatures made of the very stuff of unreality. Eventually, these instinctual, formless beings gained a rudimentary consciousness.
That's what I thought.
Were born, vast psychic presences made of the fantasies and horrors of mortals. These are the ruinous powers, and each is a reflection of the passions that form them. First amongst them is Khorne, the Lord of Battle, possessed of towering and immortal fury.
First amongst them might also mean that it's the boss, doesn't it? I don't know.
Tzeentch, the bizarre
the most
architect
present
of fate, weaves powerful sorceries to bind the future to his will, whilst great Nurgle, the god of disease, labours endlessly to spread infection and pestilence. The last of their number is Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, indulgent of every pleasure and excess, no matter how immoral or perverse. Now, the only other reference I found to some sense of Nurgle origin was in the Lords of Silence at the end of chapter 11. There is hierarchy even across the great game. Desire, knowledge, rage, these are the lesser things, the subordinate things, the ones that came later. Before them, all was despair and succour, and the slow release into abandonment. This was what came first, the primordial slop from which all else arose, only then to float like phantasms over it. In the end,
is that Khorne, or is that the Chaos God that split, so to speak, into the other four?
Despair will prevail again. In the end, every world will be a plague planet, and the tide of decay will once more lap at the foundations of reality, drowning all else. As interesting as it is, this is very vague, and at most only alludes to some sense of what came first. Now, we can all make any number of logical rationalizations as to why it could be any other way. The most common one, of course, is that the Necrontyrs suffered greatly even before any wars, as they struggled with their own mortality, and so this must have been what led to the creation of Nurgle, right? It's
no, I don't know. Do the Necron not? I thought they did not. They were not connected to the warp.
A reasonable rationale, unfortunately completely unsupported by actual reference. Maybe it will be one day, but for now it's just a speculative rationalization.
I also would not
as I say, other than that, it's been consistently stated from first to the current time that Khorne is first, so we'll take that actually established knowledge and then make further conclusions around it. However,
I don't think the thing he just said is not like he's the first, is for me is the most prominent.
As I said,
not the firstborn.
Is quite so simple.
But
we'll come to that.
let's
Yet
go with
another
what
thing
he
I feel
says
is
here.
worth getting out of the way early, which is the thinking that says because the birth of Slanesh occurred in the most recent of times, you then hear people asking, well, if Slanesh's birth was so devastating, why weren't the other three as well? That is then usually followed by the additional rationalization that this must then point to the fact that the other three gods were not born during any period of the human age, because otherwise we'd surely know about it if it's so.
Yeah, I don't know. They might have come into being like not as what would you say, heavily, sharply?
Devastating when a chaos god is born, right? Again, no. It's important to understand that the creation of Slanesh was considerably different because of what fueled it. These differences are referenced very clearly in the Harlequin's 8th Codex, the most current. It describes how
Ooh, the
it was through a
Harlequins.
slow accretion of energies that the Chaos Gods Khorne, Nurgle and Tzeentch had been born.
Yeah,
Accretion just
see?
means formed by cohesion. The birth of Slanesh, on the other hand, is also described in the Liber
Did he just explain accretion with something even more complex? Perhaps it's just me because I know accretion disk from a black hole, like it's the collected stuff around its event horizon that swirls around and it's very hot and it is the yellow reddish stuff you see, at least if you look at black hole depictions in, for example, what's it called, the Nolan film Interstellar.
Liber Chaotica, the 4th, 6th and 8th Eldar Codex, that the actual formation of Slanesh was also not a fast process. The Eldar's depraved slide into madness and horror beyond imagination had stirred up the warp to the point it had already created millennia of warp instability. The key thing to remember is that the Eldar themselves are considerably more psychically powerful than your average human pleb. Even
we
if
know
the
that.
Chaos Gods
We know
do
that. Yeah,
have
I know
more
that.
of a flavour for humanity. Also, the Eldar before the
Why? Why do they have more of a flavor to humanity? That's weird. So wouldn't they want humans to spread and help them sometimes?
More connected
Perhaps
with
they
the
do.
war. These factors contribute to the eventual event of Slanesh's birth being far more devastating than anything else before. Not to mention that fueled by Eldar's souls, it burst out of the warp like an atomic chain reaction, and as all this psychic energy from the warp storms was sucked into the implosion in the void, it consumes billions upon billions of Eldar and their souls.
Yeah.
Something that the other Chaos Gods seemed unable to do, consuming Eldar's souls, that is.
Why? Perhaps because the Elder weren't prone to the other, let's say, properties the Elder gods stand, the other Chaos gods stand for. So they only like connected with Slanesh, and I still think the birth is like, I see it like this. So birth is like going out into the world. It doesn't mean start of existence, so to speak. And I know people might argue that there are arguments I don't want to get into, but let's say before you are born, you're in the womb, and in the womb, the Chaos Gods were since the dawn of time, I guess, something like that, or they slowly formed, and then like the birth is like pushing them out into the universe and connecting them very strongly and giving them sentience, so to speak. I guess that's a metaphor I can get behind, yeah.
Fundamental difference is very simply that the birth of Slanesh involved the Eldar, whereas the other gods did not, and for that reason it was far more destructive.
How do you know
There's
the
no
other
singular
gods
process that defines
did not
how a Chaos God
connect to
should
the
or
Elder?
must come into being either. So how did it happen for the other three gods?
4 choices. Let's go. That's beautiful, the picture.
Well, at its simplest, what I've come to believe is that there are actually 4 potential possibilities with regards to the Chaos God's origins.
I like
I
that.
decided
Okay.
to outline these from the start, as I think it makes sense to do so, even if we don't discuss them in detail in this first video. It's good to have a starting point. The first 3 ideas apply specifically to only the gods of Khorne, Tzeentch and Nurgle.
Okay.
The 4th includes Slanesh.
Interesting.
First is that they were initially formed but not awakened in what we would note as being the earliest days of the galaxy's history. So
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. So
yes,
let's see what the
war
others
in
are.
heaven, but that they were then later truly awakened during the period that we think of as the emergence of mankind. This to a degree satisfies all angles.
Okay, I don't know why he's not really getting into these, or perhaps I'm misunderstanding, but so the first one is the one I always thought would be. Second is that they were fully born into the warp in a sentient state during the wars in heaven. I don't think so. I don't know. That's like I understand them more as being a subconscious and conscious entity at the same time, possibly being only subconscious before they were born. At least that's my take. So they were fully born into a warp, into the warp in ascension state. That's so weird. I don't know why that irks me. It's too simple, I think. Third, we could consider that both these previous statements are true. Yes, that of course is true. Like yeah, like there's not contradiction. But I wouldn't. I don't know. Only second feels weird. First and second together might be. Fourth, because the warp does not observe linear time, the gods have always existed, yet also for periods in mortal reality never existed. That's weird. That doesn't even make sense. I know the time's not linear thing can do some sci-fi mumbo jumbo, but I didn't like it because it has to be carefully thought through to make sense. It can make sense, don't get me wrong. Because the warp does not observe linear time, we know. But, and this is only half knowledge because I'm not as versed in this lore yet, I think. But to me, the warp is more like time dilation and compression. You know what I mean? That's what it is. So it's not linear, that's true. But that also might just mean that time sometimes is slower and sometimes is faster in the warp. And space as well. The gods have always existed, yet also for periods in mortal reality never existed. Yeah, like I said, that doesn't follow from the first part of the sentence. I hope he explains this more.
Second is that they were fully born into the warp in a sentient
Oh, I'm sorry,
state
he's reading through
wars
them.
in
Okay,
heaven,
I'm an
which
idiot.
occurred again in this earlier period of galactic history. We could consider that both of these previous statements are true, which I'll explain in more detail later.
Yeah, I think
Fourth
third is
that
the
because
most
the warp
likely.
does not observe linear time as we know it, the gods have always existed, yet also for periods in mortal reality never existed. This description of always having existed is attributed to Slanesh across multiple editions, but it seems
I don't know. That also, you know why I don't like 4 as well? Because it would disconnect the warp too much from our universe. I love the idea of it being intertwined so heavily with ours, like being this mirror world. And a mirror can have the surface that's like bent and stuff, so time might not map directly in a linear fashion, but you might have, as I said, time dilation or something like that, or spatial compression or something. But all in all, I like the close connection, and the fourth one for me would break that. I don't like it therefore, so don't know.
reasonable that if it stands for one, it stands for the others as well. But again, we'll get into all the problems that this brings up later.
Yeah, it will
Now,
bring
in
up problems.
all of this, there's also another factor in play, and it's something that I want to address in this video, and I've truly given my best effort to understand. That factor is time. Now,
Oh,
I'm no
let's see.
physicist, so cut me
I am. Let's have some fun.
some slack if something is not spot on, because
Okay.
this stuff melts your brain. But you could
Yeah,
say
it
that
kinda
some of the
does
thinking
sometimes.
I've done here is unnecessary and overthought, but personally, it felt necessary to me.
Oh, I
as
can't
was
wait for
working
this.
through
Let's
this.
go,
So
Luetin.
feel free to agree or disagree with me on the need to include this. Personally, I feel that it's important.
Also, I am also not a relativistic physicist per se. Like, I've done that, like, I've calculated stuff and I've done the basics things, but I'm an expert in quantum physics and astrophysics, which is not the same. Like, of course, they overlap, but you know what I mean? So I might also get stuff wrong
Still,
here.
the warp and chaos in the
Let's see.
6th edition rulebook is described as follows. The sheer mind-boggling impossibility of the warp defies explanation, and those who attempt to delve further into understanding its ways inevitably slip into madness. I can tell
Okay.
you from how I have felt researching and compiling all of this, this is a perfectly accurate description.
But that might also be because it's emotion space and not logic space, so to speak. So it might fuck your head. You know, it might be that. It might be if you try to apply logic to emotion, you get mad. Like, I like that. That might be why.
So onward we go. Please note I will be bringing in some occasional non-40k references in this next section just to help clarify. Looking into time and causality for me is fairly critical to both the rationalization of the Chaos Gods and just in helping us to get this stuff clear in the mind,
Yeah.
because I can see myself referencing back to this in the future.
by the way, what I just said about like the mapping not being linear, yes, it can be that, you know, you might even like invert times, so to speak, but still, what I think has to be is that every point in the warp in time and space has to be mapped to a point in time and space in the materium, and doesn't like you know that's the thing. That's what I think. There should be no gaps. So nature of time and causality. Let's
Now,
have
for
some
me, in
fun.
order to discuss the warp and its relationship to the material realm, we have to, at least to some degree, learn about time travel and paradoxes, because time travel, unfortunately, is a thing on top of all the other foggy historical
Is it
issues.
though?
Now, I say unfortunately for reasons I hope will soon become clear.
Yeah, time travel is iffy. But it would work. As I said, if there is every point in space-time in the warp is mapped to every point in space-time in the materium, time travel is only time travel from our perspective, so to speak, from the materium. But if you take both together, it's not time travel anymore. It's like just two ways time works, and you can hop between them, but they are still causally linked. You know what I mean? So it would make sense. I like that. It's like I don't know. Imagine two. Oh, I see. Let's do some didactics because that's my job. So I have some post-its here. Let me try to illustrate what I mean. Do you see this? Oh God, this is gonna be so dumb. I will do my best to make it quick, but let's do it like. Wait a moment. Oh God, what am I doing with my life? Where's the fucking... Anyway, we'll just do it like this. So, does it work? Yeah. Okay, you can see this? Okay, let's... Okay. Yeah, this works. Okay, this is perfect. So let's assume the upper paper is the warp and the lower paper is the immaterium. You could travel like here, and then you could pass over, and the way would lead you back, but you still go like one way, and you always need to go one way. I don't know if okay, it fell away, whatever. Like that's the thing. Like you always go a path, and the path might like lead into the other world, and in the other world in the other direction, but you still are on the same path all the time. So there is no jumping in points. So there's no time jump travel, so to speak. And that's what fucks stories. So if there are linear paths in the warp as well, and they are just connected paths in both layers that in relation are in the other directions, but they're still closed paths, that's perfectly working time travel. I like it. I hope this made any sense to you. If it didn't, I'm sorry. I might do a clarification video one day or something, or in a live stream explain it again with paint. But that's basically it. You know?
And I just decided to come back and actually add in this extra note, because if we're talking about time travel, there's going to be things we're going to be talking about to do with physics, to do with philosophy, and some stuff as well to do with perception. So really, what I've tried to do is just kind of take some of these existing elements and make it fit within what we're talking about within the lore. So some of this stuff you're going to have to suspend your disbelief, especially of course when it comes to time travel. But really,
with time travel, and this is a personal opinion, you never should need to do that. With time travel, you should never have to suspend your disbelief, because time travel can work logically. It can.
we're trying to just deal with the basic elements here to make a bigger picture fit. We're not super interested in drilling down on one specific point. And with that said, there's a couple of things I want to clear up from the outset, because I think it's important to just kind of get it established. Now, if this stuff doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay. It probably will make sense as we go along, or you might need to kind of come back and think about it some more. So basic causality, which is cause and effect.
Yeah.
Causality can get very complicated very quickly, especially when you pursue philosophical lines of thinking. And for our own purposes, we really need to be thinking about is just the existence of backwards causation, kind of what that means. Now,
okay. Why is he opening this kind of worms? I think, and I hope I'm not completely going off the rails here and into something he doesn't want to think about or will not think about, but the best way of time travel to think about it is and we know a bit about that from physics anyway, that everything has its own frame of reference. Like I do have mine, you have yours, and if we move at this different speeds to each other, for example, these frames of reference will change in relation to each other, which is relativity basically. But if you introduce time travel, that should still be the case. So something like world lines should be a thing. Like your own line through time and space should just be something. And another person or entity's line through time and space could be something completely different. And if it intercepts with you, yeah, that's fine. But if both have their own timeline, so to speak, it makes sense causally for each person. Doesn't matter how they are linked for me.
Now, multiple causes can lead to one effect, coupled with whatever conditions are enabling it.
What? Multiple causes can lead to one effect? No. What? Okay, perhaps let's. You should always interpret well-intentioned. So let's interpret this well-intentioned. Multiple causes. That means that certain physical quantities that have an effect on a state can like influence each other. But in physics, you mostly can. No, not always. Not always. Sometimes you have to have two things that cause one effect. But yeah, I guess that's what he wants to say. But I don't get the coupled with conditions that enable it. Like, what the fuck's that supposed to be? Multiple causes can lead to one effect. Yes, I buy that. Like, let's say that's true. But coupled with conditions that enable it. The conditions that enable it should be the causes. Like, what?
One cause may lead to multiple effects. You can have feedback where an effect gives rise to new causes and effects, including back to the cause which gave rise to that one originally.
Yes, that's all true, but it's a very complicated thing to say the time thing I just said, like the time path. So everyone has their time path, their path through space and time, disregarding of like what you would say present, future, past. But you have your own path through space and time, and other people have theirs. And when they intersect, they interact and they cause causality. But then again, they depart again, and they can meet again. And from your perspective, like the next meeting is in the future, but from the perspective of the other person, it might also be the second meeting, and the meeting in your future might be in their past. You know, that might be again with this. Like, I'm so glad I have these post-its. So let's say your way of time is upwards, this person's way of time is downwards, and you intersected these points. Like, as long as these two paths themselves are causally like have causation along them, doesn't matter if they go in other directions. If they meet at points here, these two paths, yes, then they will interact as well. But you know what I mean? That's basically the easiest way of time travel I understand, and this is probably closest to physics as well.
Effect illustration is too
because it incorporates the relativity principle. So
basic to really
like. Sorry for pausing at this point so much. This is very important, I think, because in relativity, I think if you extend it logically, that is how time travel would work from special relativity, general relativity.
Apply in what we're thinking of in terms of reality. But most cause and effect situations are, when you actually get into it, so complex. Your main priority is to just determine which cause is the decisive part in a whole set of circumstances. And again, like I say,
what? I don't understand why he's making this so complicated. Most cause and effect situations are so complex. Your main priority is to determine which cause is the decisive part in a whole set of circumstances. What? Why? It's just... I mean, I get it. He's like, yeah, okay, so if there's like a causal path, like you try to find the origin because it's too complicated otherwise. I think... this text is a bit too complicated. But if you didn't understand my explanations, you are probably like, yeah, yours was very complicated. He's making perfect sense.
If I look at a cause and effect situation, you can spin it out to the nth degree. But really what you're trying to get down to is just the primary main cause. Now, one more I just wanted to add in here to get this out of the way and get this kind of established. Again, if it doesn't make sense, it probably will later. Backwards causation. Now, that's essentially just where your cause is coming after the effect. It's essentially the reverse process. Now,
what? It's important to know the... What? Backwards causation. So you trace back causation to see where it started?
it's important to note that the philosophical concept of backward causation shouldn't be confused with backward causation when we're talking about time travel. Usually that's where you're returning from the future to the past. Now, these two concepts are only related in the sense that they both agree it is possible through a process of cause and effect to affect the past.
Why does he introduce this backwards causation thing? Why doesn't he explain it in the first sentence? Like, if you're ever heading backwards causation, the first thing would be definition, blah, 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 and then you get into more stuff.
The difference between the two is that time travel involves a causal loop, that's a closed time-like curve, which we'll explain, whereas backward causation does not. Essentially, backward causation without time travel would involve an actual kind of reversal of time, not by the use of a time machine or warping of space-time.
So basically it's like, sorry to take this in, it's doing this, like, you do time and then you reverse it, like, you know, so it's this, like, you know what I mean? So it's a, God, this is so dumb. You're gonna laugh your ass off about these stupid explanations I have here. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Yeah, but let's do it like this. So time is this, runs like this, and then there's backwards causation back to this point, and that it runs in another direction. So it's moot. Like in mathematics, you just would transform it out. It's could have a cool story about it, but then you would, yeah, but it only works if there is a point of choice here. Like if there's a choice and that leads down to this, and then it reverses it, and then there has to be another choice made to, you know, go away from it, because otherwise you would go here, make the choice, reverse time, make the choice, reverse time. You know what I mean? So there has to be at this intersection, there has to be a choice. Otherwise, you can't have this effect. Like it would make logically no sense. By the way, Dark did this perfectly. This thing, what I just explained. Oh yeah, by the way, it also almost like this is from Dark. This is one of the loops of the 3/4 knot they use. So, by the way,
again,
they did very well research time travel there.
We'll kind of get through this as we go along, but I just
made
kind of
sense
to get
perfectly in Dark.
That the philosophy and the physics is a little bit different. But of course, as I also said, they do kind of overlap with this whole thing. So, you know, we don't need to drill down.
I still don't know what he's doing. Like, you can't explain these things just with words, because if you're not an expert, not even I'm an expert, like I also wouldn't consider myself an expert in this, but this is something you have to visualize. Like I tried to do very badly probably, but you know, it's commendable that he tries to explain it, because he always like just explains stuff and never like draws stuff. This would have been a point where he should have drawn something, or he should have used an example to illustrate what he means with these words. I think that could have added to this video a bit more.
We're thinking of in terms of time, because we're thinking about the warp, and we're thinking about chaos and the demons, and the fact there's no time there, and we're thinking about reality and the materium and how there is time there, and we're trying to reconcile those two things. So like I said, there's a lot of overlap, and it's not necessary really to go right down into it. And I'll just say one other thing, guys. I apologize if my voice is kind of all over the place. I'm still in the process of recovering my damaged vocal cords.
Oh,
so
wow.
my voice gets extremely tired.
That's bad, man. I hope you
so
have
if you
recovered.
hear different qualities in my voice, it's just because of that, and nothing I can do about it. But it is improving, so. Also, some of this stuff can be hard to establish clearly in your mind, so below this video in the notes, I've included some simple definitions should you feel the need to refresh your memory.
Why don't you put them in? I'm sorry, what? What? You didn't even put a definition of backwards causality in. You just rambled some stuff, Luetin. Like, what? Oh, Luetin, why? I hope it will just make, like, I hope he knows that it will just, like, he will just explain these definitions here. Because the thing I currently feel is he's, like, driving a bit into sci-fi time travel stuff, and pseudo-philosophical stuff, you know, and it's not clearly established right now. I hope he changes it a bit.
Now, throughout all of this, keep in mind that what we are considering in the grand scheme of things is that from our mortal perspective, the Chaos Gods were somehow, at some time, born into existence. But that from the Warp's perspective, when this actually occurs, is completely irrelevant, because there they will have always existed in some sense. This is something you'll often see and hear in relation to the Chaos Gods, and the reason for this is that if the Warp has no laws governing time, then they could theoretically and very likely do exist at and use information from any point in time. As fun as
Oh my god. I'm gonna be here for a long time. So that's not what that means necessarily. What? um, if you say they were born into this world, but in the Warp they always exist, first you have to define what exist means in that sense. And like I said, if they existed subconsciously, but there was a part where our world like interacted with the Warp so much, so there was a time where they ran parallel, so to speak, where there was a lot of interactions between the layers, and suddenly they were like they grew sentient, and that might also just mean that they're not sentient in the Warp, but they are sentient in like the connection with our world. Like that's making them sentient. So they're only sentient in our world, and they are always subconscious in the Warp, or they might start to be sentient in the Warp then as well, but existed before. Because this exist thing is the crucial thing here, I think. So yeah, doesn't mean that there is no time in the Warp. That doesn't mean that at all.
as this might superficially appear to be, it actually makes things extremely complicated and also creates all manner of problems. Regardless,
Yeah, because
though, it is the reality.
Because this interpretation does, of course, it would cause problems. If you say the Warp has no time, that's no. Like, no, I'm sorry. What? How do you draw that conclusion from that? Like, I get why. I think I know his reasoning, but I would argue it's not thought through perfectly. Because the mistake here was, I don't even know if you consider it a mistake, but you have to assume that exist is being conscious. Like that is the same. If you assume that, yes, his reasoning is perfectly fine. But I would doubt that here. Because the Warp itself is made from, so to speak, at least in part of emotions, and they are not conscious. Most emotions are not conscious. Like, psychologist here now. Like, they're not. Like, 90% of your emotions are subconscious. So, of course, the Warp is in part subconscious. And these gods, like, they have this conscious part. And obviously that could have just, like, appeared through the interactions one day.
Reality of the Immaterium, I'll reference 6th edition Chaos Demons, where it has just finished describing the chronological events leading up to the birth of Slaanesh, and it states, "That is how events are viewed from the chronology of the material universe.
Yeah.
In the Warp, things are different, for the Immaterium is not bound by linear time, and
Yes.
events do not occur in a strict sequence of cause, then effect. As his rival gods reckon it, Slaanesh has always existed in the Warp, and yet has never existed at all."
Yeah. That would also fit with this consciousness thing. If they don't really understand what consciousness is, they would describe it as that. Like, she was always there and she was not. Like,
this description continues through to the current edition of the Chaos Codex. The concept of cause and effect being out of the logical sequence is deeply problematic.
also, and this might be me reaching, but cause and effect in our world is out of the reach in the Warp. Like, in the Warp, there are just like, there are cause and effect, so to speak, but very locally only. And like let's say you have like 100 square meters of Warp. That's not a thing I know, but causality is only on 2 centimeters of that. And if you go like 4 centimeters away, they are not causally linked anymore, those points, so to speak. Because they might not have things like radiation and stuff. Like, there are just points of existence in the Warp, so to speak. And they don't need to have fields interacting with each other. So, anyway.
As is the idea of gods and Slaanesh having always existed, but not because of how it affects things in the Warp. The Warp is the Warp, anything goes. The problem is trying to somehow make any sense of it at all, or how one reality without any boundaries manages to interact with one which has strict boundaries. And I should probably also mention that this is not exclusive to to chaos. Various other races, including humanity and the Eldar, have encounters which allow them to see into the past and the future.
Yeah.
The Eldar even do this as a fairly regular matter of course via their Farseers, which gives us plenty of information on how we can interpret the perception of time as it is seen in the world of 40k and how that intersects with the unreality of the warp.
Yeah, the way I understand it currently is that the warp is just, and the warp doesn't run parallel in time to our world, so to speak, and places in the warp are not connected in the way that our places are connected. So that's also weird, and I think that's how I make sense of this currently. It is of course only my understanding, and it might fail at points as well. It will probably, but that's how I go about this. Yeah, and also it makes also sense. Like if you are a Farseer, I assume the elders use the warp for this, so they can like just as well, like they can find avenues in the warp where you go into the past or the future and shortcut and then go back on another thing. Like, you know what I mean?
So from the warp's perspective, yes, the gods may always have existed. But we should
Yeah, I'm sorry to put this thing up again for that. So if you go into the future, it's like a loop, and if you reverse time, it's like the same. Like there's no loop here. Like they are like sticking together exactly. But if you have foresee something, like you take almost the same path forwards and backwards in the warp in time, so to speak.
Also consider though is that while they are able to have existed within the warp, from our perspective within a linear timeline they may not have always existed. And what's hard to understand about that? But before we get further into perceptions, first a small tangent. In
Okay.
researching this, I found several instances of people discussing the concept of time in the warp. More specifically, a quoted phrase that crops up in several novels such as Fulgrim, Battle
Let me
for the
see,
Abyss,
please.
Descent of Angels. It's a phrase usually used in describing a demon, where it
Yeah.
is said to be a creature older than time, or in relation to the warp, things exist in its fathomless depths that are older than time as we know it. Now, much as it aggravates me because I find this description to be just incredibly stupid, what it's clearly
Yes,
trying
it
to
is.
illustrate is that the warp exists fully outside the constraints that bind us, in
Yeah.
regard to our understanding of what time means, as well as
I love that. Like I'm completely with him here. Completely with him. Yeah, like older than time. I would read it as he says, I would read it as we can't understand that there's another kind of time, so to speak, or another way of moving through this other than the space-time we know. So of course we would try to put words on it that might not be like from our perspective, try to encapsulate it, but are not true. You know what I mean?
descriptions of the warp generally being utterly incomprehensible to us. If you want to go deeper, you could argue it may be trying to point towards
Oh yeah, by the
concept
way,
of
this
the
is an
warp
accretion,
having
just the
depths that are as yet undetected
stuff.
and unseen, where it describes the fathomless depths being older than time. There was a theory, an actual physics theory, that I'd read which suggested black holes could be remnants of past universes that have collapsed in on themselves.
That's no. So before he speaks on, he will probably say what it's really currently the hypothesis I've heard that was the most sensible is that they're not collapsed universes, they are future universes. So black holes, and I think I talked about it, so I'm not going to talk about it too long because I don't want to bore you again, but it's like there is a hypothesis which is called something like the evolutionary theory of universes, which means that the theory is there, or not the theory, the hypothesis there is that black holes are, so to speak, gates or our other universes. Because we can show from mathematics that our whole universe is the same as a black hole. So we are living on the surface of a black hole. You can show that at least the mathematics is the same. So if you want to say we do, that's fine. If you also say, yeah, the mathematics is just the same, you are also fine to do that. But let's just go with it for a moment, because the mathematics, like the mathematics of the universe, so to speak, is the same as the mathematics on top of the surface of a black hole. So we could say we're on a black hole here. The universe is a black hole, and our universe produces other black holes, so they produce other universes. So it's like a procreative process of universes. And another thing that's very cool, and that's also just hypothesis or perhaps even wishful thinking, we don't know, but the theory is that every black hole creates a universe where the natural constants are a bit different, like there are tiny differences. And through that evolutionary process, more and more universes are born that are more and more prone to create black holes again. So you know what I mean? So it's like also evolutionary stuff. So that is that is the link between black holes and universes that I currently know in the current physics. So no, they're not remnants of dead universes. They are new universes, and they are the procreative process of our universe, if you want to ascribe to that hypothesis. Sorry, it got longer than I wanted, but yeah.
And that this could have happened in a big crunch, and that they then somehow managed to exist despite subsequent big bangs. The premise being that the laws of physics when close to a point of a big bang or crunch become uncertain, and as a result such a primordial black hole could survive.
That's a bit gibberish. That sounds like something from the 90s, which is not bad. Like for their time, it was logical, probably. Big Crunch also is like, why would a universe? He said collapse, and then he said Big Crunch. Big Crunch is ripping apart, but collapsing is obviously not ripping apart, but like falling, like the expanding and contracting again. So that's already a physics from a physics perspective. That's a contradiction he just brought up here without knowing, of course. So yeah, primordial black holes are a theory, though I think we have not found them, basically. So there's a low chance they exist. So yeah, but you can't disprove them, of course. Like, how do you do that? Like, you can just say we haven't found one yet. It's the same as you can't disprove aliens. You can just say we haven't found them yet. So interesting stuff.
Now, why do I mention this? Well, because if we accept the warp is a mirror reflection of our material realm, one could assume it goes through a similar process to that which occurs within our own material space, and who knows how that affects the entities within, if it affects them at all, that is. Now, I could then more readily accept that they would be older than we can reasonably comprehend, as was stated to be older than time.
Oh, that's cool though, yeah. That is something which does not contradict my take at any point, but it adds to that as well. The warp might be the substance that like flows around every universe then. So the universe before ours is also connected to the warp. Like the warp is, so to speak, the mortar between the bricks, and the bricks are the universes. So the warp is everywhere and forever. And the chaos gods are subconscious everywhere also forever. And that would then make sense. So
then again, it seems just as likely that this phrasing of being older than time is, like many descriptions in 40k, simply an over-dramatic way of referring to the fact that time is.
But I like the mortar theory now. That's cool.
To our perceptions of time, our material realm from our point of view exists on a linear timeline. The warp exists outside of this and obeys none of the laws we consider essential in order to make any sense of things. We know this to be true of the warp, and with better descriptions than being older than time. Straight descriptions, such as it being a churning ocean of chaos, raw emotion, madness, given form, where the laws of physics, time, and nature are meaningless concepts and nothing is as it seems. Events with individuals, ships and so on may be lost for thousands of years in warp space, only to then appear having apparently not observed any passage of time.
Yeah, that's what I said with the time paths. That makes perfect sense then.
A good illustration of this perceived time distortion occurs in the Night Lord's novel Voidstalker, where we discover that every marine within the warp can seemingly perceive time completely individually, a concept that seems impossibly hard to wrap your head around.
No, that's basic physics. Everyone observes time individually always. What? That's the basic that's the basic rule of general relativity. Relative. Everything is relative. It's all from your reference frame. Okay. Yeah, so.
In this extract, Talos is a Chaos Marine. How long have you waged this war, Talos? He shook his head, feeling this sudden need to swallow. A long time, the heresy was the bloodiest decade. Then the raiding years, 2 centuries of bitter glory before the Imperium came for us. And how long since we left the Carrion world? For the Imperium? He narrowed his eyes at the question. Almost 10,000 years. No. How long for the traitor legions? How long for you, Talos? He swallowed again.
Yeah, That's it. That's what I said.
Beginning to sense where this was leading. The warp stole all meaning from the material realm, even banishing all pretense of physics and the temporal stability. The Great Heresy was days in the past for some of the traitors within the Eye, and 50,000 years gone for others.
Yeah, perfect, exactly that. They all had their own trajectories in the warp. And they might not even be really like, through coincidence or like emotional connection in the warp, they might travel together, but not like there's no time field, so to speak, that is true for everyone. Like time is not the same for everyone, for any two people in the warp, ever. And that makes perfect sense then.
All of them, each and every soul to betray the Emperor in that golden age, could claim a different scale of time for the years since.
I love that.
Talos would
Perfect.
say,
Brilliant.
A century since we left. Less than many, but more than some. A century for you, a century for First Claw. That makes you over 300 years old. So in this description, we see from Talos' perspective that it has been 10,000 years since the Night Lords left their homeworld in the 32nd millennium to enter the Eye of Terror. In actuality, it turns out it's only been 300 years. So for Talos, time in the warp has been dragging on for an agonizing length of time. However,
no, it's just that they have a personal time, so to speak. You get that in the warp. Like it's just your path is might go through 1,000 meters or 2 meters. And the longer the path, the more time you spend in the warp, I guess. So
this could easily happen in reverse, as the warp has no respect for the laws of the materium. It could equally have been a century of time passed in the warp, but 10,000 years in material space passed.
Perfectly.
How you reconcile these perceptions while presumably interacting and planning with fellow Marines in the warp is, to nobody's surprise, not expanded upon.
But why? You could easily do that. I just did it in this video. It's easy. It's easy to explain. Like no big brain move there. You just have to imagine them as their own paths, and the materium and the immaterium being two separate sheets of paper, so to speak. And sometimes they're folded, so like you have longer paths. Sometimes they're like this wormhole thing. You know, put the stupid pen through it like an event horizon, and you know. For me, this is perfectly logical that this is a thing. Like, it makes perfect sense from physics.
Obvious reasons that it's incomprehensible.
No, it's not. What?
On the 5th edition.
No, it's not incomprehensible. It's basic physics. Basically, it's not really basic physics, but it's like that's how general relativity is. Everyone has their own time frame. Like what?
Rulebook. If the Emperor fails, then the demons of chaos will flood into the galaxy. Every living human will only become a gateway for the destruction of mankind, and the stuff of warp space will submerge the galaxy. There'll be no physical matter, no space, no time, only chaos.
Yeah.
Another example of a distorted passage of time occurs for Horus when he emerges from the warp portal on Davin, exclaiming to his Astartes retinue how surprised he is that they waited all this time for him, when in actuality the time passed for them has been very small, and they all seem fairly confused as to what Horus is going on about.
Is he going to go on about the time dilation thing? I think that's settled for us right now. Like, there's no mystery there. It's just normal physics.
Other events point to potential time loops deliberately caused by chaos, such as the turning of Horus.
There might be other time
false
stuff.
Gods, Horus is spoken to by a demon who shows him a vision of the future. A future where the Emperor is being worshipped as a god. Pilgrims and religious worshippers are flooding the streets, and while he observes some statues of Primarchs, statues of Horus and some of his other brother Primarchs, however, are missing.
Yeah.
This immediately disturbs Horus. The demon twists this vision by misleading Horus into questioning what the Emperor's true overall intentions are, and more importantly distorts his perception of how such things could have come to pass.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's what I said. Like the thing with the future travel thing. Like, as long as you don't physically travel into the future, like if your soul just travels into the future, it's basically you go into the warp with your soul, the soul travels your path, and then like goes to the intersection point of warp and materium on the point you want to see, look at it, but still stay in the warp, like look through a warp window, so to speak, and then just travel back. That's so cool. I like it. It makes perfect sense.
The demon is not simply showing Horus a crafted imaginary vision. It's much more than that. It's showing him visions and information from the future.
Yeah,
The past,
perfectly,
of course,
perfectly
is relative
reasonable.
to your position in time, but that's exactly why this kind of thing creates problems, as I'll
No, it doesn't create problems. What? Why would it create problems?
explain. This event with Horus is troubling because it violates the law of causality. We're of course also assuming that we're not subscribing to the concept of multiple timelines, which from a few sources do seem to potentially be also a thing in 40k, but do you really want us to go off on that thread? No.
Yeah, no, I don't like that. I don't like that. It makes perfect sense currently because causality still is there, still even through the warp, but not like this. The people running through the warp are just like their paths are causality a bit as well, but they just don't casually interact. And so he saw the future, like it was always like that. He always came back to this one point. Like you know, it's I don't know. It's not that it's predetermination. It's not that hard.
Nope. Okay, great. Because seriously, I'm choosing to opt out from the multiple timelines thing because it just gets horribly, horribly complicated. And it's alluded to here and there in the lore, but it could also be people just phrasing things differently. Maybe in the future we can get into that concept, but for now, I'm putting a pin in it.
Yeah.
Also, just to tease you, I did find references to the possibility of the 40k galaxy, or at least the warp being an omniverse. But to be fair, it was from
What is
first
that?
edition supplement, and it's an offhand reference.
What
that's
is that?
very
I don't know. I
unclear.
don't know that name.
It's not a strong enough source to base anything on, but we can also discuss that in the future. This is a place of worship, says Horus. The demon nodded and said, "It is an entire world given over to the praise of the Emperor. But why? The Emperor is no god. He spent centuries freeing humanity from the shackles of religion. This makes no sense. Not from where you stand in time, but this is the Imperium that will come to pass if events continue on their present course."
Wow, wait a moment. If it's a thing that has this predetermination, the demon obviously is from the warp and probably can see all of time and space. Do they truly want to invade and destroy humans, or are they just there to ensure that the future happens, so to speak? And yes, they're malevolent forces and stuff, but they seem to not be able to change the future. They are just, it's like chaos is the guardian of determination, so to speak, then. That's weird and interesting. And it's just humanity's nature that makes the future so grim then as well. And because obviously they are linked to the warp, so and their bad emotions are, and the bad emotions, we spoke to this before, that Chaos God could also be benevolent if the mentality of the people feeding them were good. I think we know that. So because humanity chose this path of war, or is on this path of war, the Chaos Gods have to ensure, because they obviously are then negative and they invade and stuff, but they still ensure the future they know is gonna happen. So they are not like evil, they just act evil because humanity is evil and their evil feeds them. Wow, that would be such a fuck you to humanity as well. Holy shit. Holy shit, that's awesome. Might be. Oh my god, that would be such a middle finger. That would be such, because then the crusade of humanity and all, and the elder and stuff, all the negativity just fed into this negativity in the future. Oh, that's so cool,
said the demon. The Emperor has the gift of foresight, and he has seen this future time. For what purpose, says Horus? To destroy the old faiths, so that one day his cult would more easily supplant them all.
Yeah, that as well. Someone told me that the Emperor saw the real future. He did.
No, said Horus.
Interesting.
I won't believe that. My father
so there is
refuted
no
any notion of
change the
divinity.
future. It's
He
all
once said of
predetermined,
ancient
I
Earth
guess.
that there were torches who were the teachers, but also extinguishers who were the priests. He would never have condoned this. Yet this entire world is his temple, the demon said. And it is not the only one.
Yeah. That's so cool, though. So then the demons have to ensure, like this demon who showed
The most
Horus had to
twisted part
ensure
of
that
the
this
exchange
happens.
is, of course, where the demon explains that
Because they
these
saw
events
it.
will come to pass
Destiny
if events
trip.
continue on their present course. This is deliberately manipulative, and we cannot know if the demon even has any free will in this situation
Yeah!
because it fails to mention the critical information that these events are caused by Horus turning away from the Emperor.
Yeah,
The demon
exactly that. The demon might just be a tool.
frames this to make it sound as if Horus continues to remain to be loyal to the Emperor. This is the future he'll run into. Clearly this is not the case, and the demon knows it. Again, dismissing the concept of multiple possible futures because that really is a road I don't think it's constructive or necessary for us to go down.
I agree,
As we
Luetin.
see it from the perspective in the novel, we are in the present time. Except by showing Horus these visions, the actual act of showing him and his subsequent reactions are not the problematic cause and effect that we need to consider.
You know what also, on a meta writing perspective, this also fits because the story is written simultaneously in 30k and 40k currently. We have the Horus Hersey novels and stuff, and we have the 40k, 41st k or whatever stuff that's coming out. It's all coming out at the same time. So you might also, from a meta perspective, think of this as like all is written already. Like you can't have a story that changes anything in the storyverse. I love this so
The
much.
actual cause
Oh,
of
this
Horus's
makes so much
reaction
sense.
and his
What
subsequent
an awesome thing.
interpretation of the visions shown by the demon is not the literal process of him being shown the vision. That's merely the conduit. The cause is, of course, his own actions that will take place in the future.
Yeah.
Actions that will then ultimately create the future that is shown to him in the visions.
Yeah,
in
destiny
his
trips.
past. The cause, or a significant part of it anyway, of Horus's turning takes place in the future, not the past. The effect of the future actions via the demon's vision are felt by him in the past, causing him to choose the path which will then
Yeah.
continue this
Perfect.
time loop. In this
Yeah, because time is already there. Our time is already there from the first to the last day, so to speak, and the chaos is connected to it and makes sure that jumps around that are supposed to happen, and information travels that might otherwise destroy it. Like it's just it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, all of it. Then I like it. Like it's always intricate if they pull it off to write something like that. Dark had it. Predestination had it. Those are the two stories where it was perfectly done. You should watch those two. Dark is a TV show, best TV show that exists in my mind, and Predestination, awesome movie with Ethan Hawke, and it tackles this thing as well. And you can make it work, and if it works, it's awesomely beautiful, just beautiful
reverse
art.
process violates the laws of causality. This type of situation is more specifically referred to as a predestination paradox. Now, a paradox, simply described, is something that has a logically unacceptable conclusion.
But it doesn't have it. It just has it when you assume that only our time exists and like everyone is the same time. But the moment you assume everyone has their individual times and you can interweave them and stuff, there's no problem anymore. There's no paradox there. A paradox always only interesting stuff about paradox are, and most people I think don't know it. Perhaps many people know it. So if your logical arguments go to a paradox, that means the logic you used was not good enough. Here as well, if you use the logic in universe, everyone is at the same time, and we have one time arrow, it doesn't work anymore, that logic. That there's just one giant cause and effect arrow, so to speak, doesn't work anymore. And you need that as a primary argument for this paradox. So if you take like everyone's their own timeline, they are interwoven in points, and it's already written everything, then the paradox is not there anymore.
So if you're willing to accept that something is full of paradoxes, you're basically saying that you no longer care about logic at all. At which point, basically, anything goes. Anything can happen. Nothing has any rules.
No.
For me, this just takes things that previously were interesting and or dramatic because of how events unfolded and just kind of makes them pointless and a waste of time.
No, why? Why does it matter? What does it matter? You're reading a story, mate. It's pre-planned all the time. Like, that's an argument, like, if you don't know what the future is, it doesn't change the story. If you know everything is predetermined, but you don't know where it goes, it doesn't matter. Like, if I would say to you, let's take a story, what story is currently ongoing? What big story is currently ongoing that people let's say One Piece. Yeah, you know what? Let's say One Piece. One Piece is already written in the author's head. It exists in its whole, and you read it every week. So the ending is predetermined. It is not predetermined in universe perhaps, but even there you could argue it is. So why do you even read it? It's boring. You know, like it has been written. I would argue that if you don't know what the ending is, like you don't know with One Piece because only the author knows it, and I don't know most of it because I've only seen the live action, but like I know it's ongoing and many people like it. Like that's not an argument. If you know the outcome, then it might be boring. But I think that argument is a bit moot. Like he's basically saying, yeah, but like all these wars and battles, I don't find them interesting anymore if I know they are like all predestined. They are written. Someone writes them. I know that's not exactly the same, but I think it's the same enough to not. I don't know. I don't like that argument. Let me know what you think. Because I have never heard any contradiction to the everything is predetermined in the 40k universe. So you still don't know how the battles turn out. It's basically saying, yeah, they have a bigger story in mind. They already wrote down on a piece of paper, put it in the safe, and like every 5 years, some author gets to look at it and like write it down. Still, like, I don't know.
This is why I am not especially a huge fan of time travel being thrust into worlds which could well do without it. I am a fan of time travel, but not where it has a habit of undermining the logic of key events. Because once that's happened, it damages the foundations of things, and will then usually steadily undermine everything else.
Oh god, I'm gonna be here tomorrow. Yes, I agree with some of what he says here. I don't like time travel either, in most cases. Because most cases, they use logic that doesn't make sense in universe. And you have certain time travel principles. Like you have predestination, you have branching, or you have illogical shit. And most people use illogical shit. Like the worst thing I've ever seen was, what's this? It's with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis. Looper. Looper is one of the worst time travel stories I've ever seen. What a piece of crap logically. Like nothing made sense there. So I get it. Like you have to be very careful writing time travel. You have to. And most time travel turns out to be real crap. It does. Because the rules set up in universe are not applied everywhere, and then it goes into a fucking mess. And I get him here, but if you just say the rule of this universe is predestination, at least in the in the materium, and the warp makes sure it stays that way, that's a perfectly fine setup. And that might lead to some very, very sad things as well. Like people might realize it one day, and they might have harrowing journeys trying to grapple with it, and in the end failing against the inevitability of the world, which is a theme of Warhammer, I think. It's horror. The inevitability of the world, horror. So
situation with the warp and our material reality is annoyingly an even worse situation, because it attempts to align and even intersect a realm which has no laws relating to time or physics stacked up against one that does.
It does have laws of time. You just told me people in it experience time. And it might be in bits or slow or long, but they experience time. That alone is a law of time.
On that basis alone, it's set up for problems right from the start. So for anyone who had up until now thought or had read others explain about this idea that the Chaos Gods existed forever, it might well be a fun idea, but as I said before, it also somewhat, if not fully, has a habit of breaking everything else. That's if you're taking it all fairly seriously, of course.
I don't know, mate.
Now, coming back to our Horus turning example.
I'm sorry, yes, of course it does. Like, if you say they always were sentient, yes, that breaks it. I agree. That breaks it. Like, I agree with his assessment that the always is like, they try to give it a name or a meaning because they don't have the words for it.
It is true in a sense that Chaos are the cause of Horus becoming a traitor, but in a weirder realization, he actually causes himself to turn to Chaos.
Yeah, so
in
what?
linear time, a cause should always precede an effect.
There is no
If
linear
this is
time.
reversed, then it can create a closed.
There is no linear time, not even in our universe. Why is he holding on to this linear time thing? I think it's just because I've worked with non-linear time a lot. So for me, it's like he's like it's like complaining about the number 11 because you only know numbers 1 to 10 and think that's everything. And then there comes 11 and you're really mad about it. I don't mean this negatively in any way. I just want to explain how this feels to me right now. But I know it's a very high concept and very complex. And if you don't know the physics, his assumptions here seem very, very solid. So, but
Time
it's
loop
just
and a paradox, which is the case here with Horus. It's possible that he wouldn't have turned against the Emperor had he not been shown this vision of the future. If we are assuming that choice is even an option and multiple options are viable. But
Nope,
the process
they are not.
he enters into is not a reasonably logical one, and his vision leads to him taking actions which then cause the future that is shown to him, a future which will then lead him to take those actions to cause that future,
Yep.
and so on.
I got it.
This process is not
Perfectly
logical because it creates a larger problem caused by this, and indeed by most closed
Okay,
time loop events, in that as a result they make the past, present and future hard, if not impossible, to determine from a causal perspective.
Why is that a problem? What? Why is that a problem? I really don't get his obsession with saying this makes no sense, because it does. Makes perfect sense. It's just not the typical everyday feeling of time you have. But that's what physics also, by the way, is. Like quantum physics, special relativity, all of that stuff is stuff where you in your normal day would say, no, that's rubbish. But it is, if you think about it, very logical. Like quantum physics, like you can tunnel. Like electrons can tunnel through walls. Like you would say in everyday life, I can't tunnel through a wall. I can't just run into a wall and be on the other side. And like it's the same thing here. Like you would also say like electrons can't do it. Do you know what I mean? I completely get his confusion, but he's too adamant on being right here. I feel he's not open-minded enough, and I hope this doesn't come off as asshole-ish. I don't know, because he puts a lot of thought into this, but I don't know. It feels too narrow-minded here what he's doing.
Now, I'll put a pin in that and we'll come back to this very shortly. Firstly, I'll just say that this kind of time loop situation is why time travel, unless handled mechanically well, is not a favourite of mine to just casually throw into a narrative or universe.
Yes, I agree
than not,
here.
It's handled very lazily and creates numerous paradoxical situations, and these can then undermine any larger narrative attempting to be told, making the whole thing basically, as I said already, feel like a pointless waste of time.
The pointless waste of time, I completely disagree. I made my point about that, though. What I do agree, though, is that it's not paradoxa that are the problem with time travel. Paradox are, in every story they come up, they are solved. Because there will be a rule set of time travel. Like I said, predestination, branching universes, or also personalized time stream, so to speak, as well. And by tackling the paradox, you will know what rules your time travel operated under, and everything will be fixed. Because the paradox of time travel are fixed by the method of time travel. Always. Always. And if they're not, it's not that they're paradoxical and can't be solved, but it's because the writing's shit and illogical. It's not paradoxical, it's illogical then. And that's the difference.
And this is often very annoying because most of the principles around time travel and causality, from a layman's version without all the math anyway, are actually not especially difficult to understand. So it's frustrating when time travel is just wedged in to either prop up a narrative or form some convoluted plot device.
No, man, I completely disagree, because this predestination thing has very, very scary implications for the universe. It means that the demons are, in a sense, a bit timeless, a bit at least, so they know the future and they will make sure it comes to pass, and they can't change it. Like, they're tools, and the future is horrid, and it's only horrid because demons act the way they are, because every influence they do is a negative one. They are fed through humanity. So humanity's anger and hate are what leads them into a certain future of catastrophe, and you can't change it. That's like, isn't that horror beyond belief? Like, it's not lazy and pointless. It's like, it's very nuanced, badass horror. Like, what the fuck?
Many physicists already consider time travel to the past to be essentially impossible, because generally speaking, it's agreed upon that time is a linear, unidirectional stream. This is obviously based on our real-world understanding of time.
No, it's not linear. Physicists don't say that. No fucking physicist says that. I'm sorry. That's dumb. No. No physicist says it's linear. I completely agree with the One Direction stuff currently. Yes, that is true. He's like, but the linear, like, does he know what linear is? Linear also means the same. Like if I go 2 days into the future and then 2 days again, it's the same. And if you go 2 days into the future and 2 days, and I go 4 days into the future, it's the same. That means linear. If you say you go 2 days into the future and then 5, and I went 4 days into the future, that's not linear anymore as well. Like, he's confusing this, I think. But I'm sorry, the physicist dick inside me just woke up.
Time and the laws which exist in our material reality. In the warp, these laws do not apply.
Yeah,
of course, as I
okay.
am regularly more than happy to point out, 40k is not based strictly on reality. That's a shock, I know, but whether or not we like it, time travel is very much a thing in the world of 40k.
Yeah, because the warp is an introduction to a device. Like, basically, that's what the warp does. The warp does give you the ability to go backwards in time, so to speak, to go to what you read about in books. Like, you can do that through the warp. That's the device they put into the story to make it possible. Like, that's the science gibbly-goo that makes it possible. So he says correctly, you can only go in one direction in time. Currently, that's the case. So you have to add this sci-fi mumbo-jumbo gibbery thing. Let's call it that. Like, you have to add something, like a new material, a new energy source, something that makes it possible, which we don't have. And if you add that, then you can explore it. And they did. Added warp. Perfectly fine.
It's been referenced numerous times with weird ancient entities, self-aware Dark Age of technology spacecraft, and so on. As I say though, I often feel this isn't a great idea because whilst it's tantalising as a plot device for authors, time travel, just even at its simplest, has a habit of making things incredibly complicated, especially when we might consider that there are different concepts of time travel.
Yeah, that is so true. And you know what kind of time travel I also fucking hate? The one where you go into the past to have member berries. I hate that so much. They do it more and more often nowadays. I like when you do time travel and meet like characters you missed a bit, like because they died or something, and you see them one last time or something. Like, yes, that also is member berries, but for purely member berry reasons, I hate it.
And you start to get into things like multiple realities,
Yep.
timelines, time loops, scenarios like the
Yep.
grandfather paradox,
Yep.
closed time-like curves,
Yep.
so on.
Yeah,
Now,
perfect
if we were
stuff.
talking only about the warp, that does give us more breathing space. Not to mention, of course, that whenever anyone is travelling through the warp in a ship, they are effectively already time travelling. It's actually surprising
Yes,
it doesn't
that's
cause
true.
even more confusion in the Imperium than already exists, honestly. Because Gellerfield or no, just the distances and time differences across the galaxy are going to be so vast, the logistical implications are just insane.
That is
This is
true.
already
That is true, but I guess that's the problem they have. I don't think their travel is very stable, their travel networks.
semi-referenced, where planets that may suddenly find themselves besieged by Xenos, even if they get a message out, may be attended from one perspective fairly quickly, but on arrival, it turns out the planet's actually been dead for centuries. This
Wow,
is not
yeah.
an unusual thing to occur in the Imperium, and especially when you're sending
Yeah.
communications over distances and so on.
Oh,
So let us
that's an
consider
awesome
a
image.
realm without time. Let's start with that. How does that work?
Yeah.
Well, we know because the law tells us it's incomprehensible. Now, for me, that's simply not good enough, I'm afraid.
Yes, agreed.
One might want to argue that in an eternal realm which has no reasonable concept of time, because it has never existed for them, this could be problematic for the entities therein, as they would have no way of perceiving time in the linear sense as we understand it, meaning their ability to take specific purposeful actions would become almost random or meaningless.
Yes. Adding to this hypothesis I just came up with in this video, that they are like tools, slaves of determination or something.
Because if they're darting in and out of the
Predestination.
warp and time varies seemingly almost at random, the idea of following up previous actions in reality from the warp is obviously highly confusing.
Yeah.
You could also assume from our perspective anyway that this could make it extremely difficult for entities in the warp to, say, locate events or find individuals if, from their perspective, they are seeing across the entire scale of time as it has existed in the material realm. Or, as we learned earlier, time is apparently perceived even separately by all individuals within the warp. So how the hell does that work? Let's imagine that we exist in the warp and we're trying to find a specific event or individual to locate. It'd be like attempting to find a grain of sand floating randomly in space, lost at some place at some time.
I would assume, because it's an emotional space, that you have to be emotionally close to the event, so to speak, and then you can get there faster. So if you're like, let's say you're a space marine and you travel through the warp, like a Chaos Space Marine traveling through the warp, like the problem he had, some were very long gone and some very shortly. So all of them have like this goal in mind, at least somewhere in their brain. And depending on how strong that goal is and how strong their emotions with the goal are and how strong the state they're in with the state they will be when they are at their goal at the time and place, it will take longer or shorter time for them. Like, that will be my explanation.
Across the entire galaxy, and also its continually changing position. One thing we do know is that warp entities have already taken specific and planned actions into the material realm. So we can.
That's why that would also mean why the Chaos God's influence is so quick and close to places where, the emotions are that they represent.
At least assume they have some way of engaging specifically with events in our reality. Alternatively, if you want to take the excessively simplistic, non-thinking option, then you may be happy with the explanation that it's just the nature of the Chaos Gods and it's all godlike and essentially they just know all, in air quotes. They're just somehow able to, by ways we cannot fathom, to sense a very established version of our timeline. It's all laid out for them to move us mortals around like some eternal galactic board game. It's a pretty lazy way to explain it, but if that works for you, then fine, I guess.
You know what it also might be? Well, that would be even worse. The warp is there, so to speak. Like, if it was just our universe, there would just be predetermination, so to speak, predestination. And we might figure that out. But this is giving false hope. Like, it's also predestined. All of it is predestined together only, though, so it's harder to figure out. It's also very dickish.
Already this far through the video, I'm assuming you aren't lazy when it comes to these things, so let's continue. Now, I'll just say as well that in relation to this idea that because the warp observes no time, the Chaos Gods could appear at any point and have theoretically always existed, even if we were to assume that we still should remember that the Chaos Gods cannot exist in material space, they can of course reach out and touch the minds of mortals to sway things in their favour.
That also makes sense, because if you think about the Chaos Gods and their emotions, you get close to them in the warp. Like, you have an equivalent part of you always in the warp, I assume, your soul or whatever, or your mind. And if you feel like the Chaos Gods, so to speak, you get close to them in the warp. So you go towards them in the warp without knowing, and then they connect and can reach to you. Like, they don't search you out, you search them out then.
They're able to push demons out into the material world, while again remembering that this can only happen in very specific circumstances like possession, willing mortal vessels, weak psychers, warp storm tears, ritual summoning, and so on. It also requires great amounts of energy from the warp in order to do this stuff. Now, as we uncover past details of ancient times, you'll see how this relationship becomes inherently more complicated. But for now, let's just take it as read that the Chaos Gods could be anywhere at any time throughout history. We still have no real idea about how much of their actions are limited. Do they have more power to exert relative to different periods in the material realm? Or is all the emotional and spiritual energy across time just absorbed en masse like some kind of collective finite energy reserve? Unknown. And again, not so easy to even wrap your head around. This concept itself gets more complicated because if certain events have to occur, that is to say as part of a closed time loop, then would certain amounts of warp energy that are necessary be pre-designated in a sense? The more you think about
Yes, because the warp is also predetermined. Just not in time and space. Like, it's not time and space. It's emotional pathways. Like, you can't time correlates with emotional closeness and strength, I would assume, and not with time and spatial relations. Which is, yeah, okay, that's another measurement of distance. Still a distance in time. Like, no problem there. So you can have predestined worlds, like a predestined warp materium world.
it, the worse it gets.
I love
And
it.
especially
It's so.
if you then get into
It makes
discussing
perfect
things
sense.
like
All of this.
the
I love
closed
it.
time-like curve or grandfather paradox. So let's get into
Yeah, he
that.
really doesn't like the
The
paradoxes.
simplest way
does he?
to explain a closed time-like curve would be a trajectory through space-time that allows for time travel to the past without exceeding the speed of light. You could also describe it as a path in space-time that returns to its starting point. And movies like Primer are a good reference for this.
Okay, so he did use visuals. I like that, but it's a bit sad that he only now explains the like a closed time loop or something. Like, that should have been in the beginning. Like, if I would have done it, and again, you might argue it would have been worse, but I would have started with, these are the definitions of causality, blah, blah, blah. Like, easy definition, have 2 examples, like, start with that, then visualize these things like closed time loop, grandfather paradox, like, just tell them, because people might not know, and we also learn how you think they are, because sometimes if I would tell the grandfather paradox, it might be a bit different than what you read somewhere, you know, so we are on the same level, and then you could start applying it to Warhammer, but this is unfortunately a bit confusing the way he does it, but I like his effort a lot, and he's got some very, very nice facts and stuff here. I really like the video.
Grandfather paradox is
But you
another
know,
well-known, and it's a very
he really is not a
straightforward
physicist.
example of a paradox. The concept being that if you say went back in time to kill your grandfather, then you could not have existed. So consequently, you couldn't have travelled to the past to kill your grandfather. So
See, this is perfect. This is a perfect example for what I said about Paradoxa. And again, he should have done this far earlier. So this is the thing. So our rule set of just one arrow in time doesn't apply here anymore, because it breaks the logic here. So it's not what is true. Like, it's not it is not the description of time that fits enough here. So you need a new model of time. And that's like basically what you do in physics all the time. Like, if we would find the grandfather paradox in physics, we would need to add on to physics to make it like better. Like, then physics wouldn't be good enough. Here as well. Like, if linear time doesn't explain this, you need other time. That's the thing.
then he's alive, which means you do exist, and you can then go back in time to kill your grandfather.
Yep.
And so on. It creates a paradox.
Yep.
In the movie Primer, the 2 time travelers attempt to avoid any paradoxical situations by isolating themselves away from the world during their present time for a set period, so that when they then travel back in time to that previously set point where they isolated themselves, they theoretically avoid issues of causality. It's a very clever film and one of the best representations of time travel that's been handled well.
I've not seen Primer. I've not seen it, but I know there is this graph where there's branching timelines or something, or loops, and it's like a giant graph with loops, so...
Of course, their best intentions turn out to be fairly impossible, and the whole thing becomes very complicated. Incidentally, if you've never seen Primer, I strongly urge you to do so. Anyway, these kind of paradoxes are one element that have led physicists to generally agree time travel to the past to be impossible. Along with some others suggesting that our universe isn't even capable of containing something like a closed time-like curve.
No, it's not possible by linear time laws. No physicist will tell you, I hope. Please, physicists, tell me you wouldn't have told him this. No one would have told him that, yes, the grandfather paradox is a thing, so we can't time travel. No, with the rules of time we set into the paradox, we can't time travel. So if we one day observe time travel, we need new rules of physics there. Like, that's the thing. Like, you can't just say it's impossible because there's a paradox. No, it proves nothing.
These issues, though, don't
What?
necessarily apply for us, because that relies on us being able to reasonably define what is and isn't possible within the warp, or to say how chaos gods and even demons may or may not be able to travel through time. It could also be that the notion of being able to travel forward or back to a specific point may not be something warp entities even have any control of, or perhaps even they understand how inherently dangerous it might be to try and manipulate a timeline or timelines depending on which construct of time travel you're subscribing to, and how you may want to speculate on the concept of timelines. We have a tendency to immediately think of a place without time as a realm where you could easily just reach out or visit any point in time, more specifically choose to affect those events there.
That's
Except
true.
there's nothing really to suggest that's actually the case one way or the other in regards to the warp.
Yes, that
Regardless
is
of
true.
how or if warp entities could consciously move to specific points in time, the whole thing brings up problems, simple little problems like, violating the laws of causality and entropy.
No, I'm not gonna go into the causality stuff again because I think I've made my point clear. Like that's unfortunately not very, let's say, recent physics he's talking about. But I could also make the argument to break this counterpoint of his by saying, yeah, but chaos entity have some kind of will, so there seems to be at least some progression in their states of will, and you might not say that's a causality process, like them changing like ideas or something, but they change. So there's something like that's what time measures, change. Just that's everything. Like if something changes, there's time. That's time. Like that's the most basic understanding of time. Like no reference frames, nothing. Just if there's something that changes, there has been time. So if demons change in ideas, in mindset, in size, in anything, there's time, personal time. So he already made his argument moot.
With causality in our material realm, we generally consider both time and consequently causation has a singular direction. You cannot take an action that will cause an effect in what we see as the past, because the past has already happened. And
that's true.
Now permanently behind us in time.
Yeah, that's why the warp is there.
You
That's
take
why
an
they
action
introduced the
to
warp.
push a glass off of a table, thus causing it to fall and smash. You cannot undo this effect, and the cause has already occurred. The other being the law of entropy, or the second law of thermodynamics, that systems will always flow from a state of order to a state of disorder, meaning that the entropy of the universe is always increasing. A simple example of this would be heat dispersal, the law of entropy describing why heat energy will flow from hot to cold, but not the other way around.
Yeah, that is also true. Like, this is completely true what he says here. And by the way, I think what he's trying to do is use entropy to define time. No, you'd use time to define entropy. Like, entropy is basically if you don't work against it, and you can for a bit, like not forever, of course, but you can work against entropy for a bit. But let's say you don't, so entropy happens, and every state in entropy, like the change in states through entropy, that's also time. Yes, that's true. I wrote a paper on quantum thermodynamics and quantum entropy like 1 or 2 years ago. And we also made the case there that because in quantum physics, time like very probably is also quantized. So you have like state A, state B, and like let's say you have oh God, these stupid post-its. You have this, and then like some arbitrary time later you have this. Doesn't really matter what the time scale between these two things were, but you had this and then you had this. And you can calculate the entropy of this system, of this like post-it moving away, and the post-it will just like move away as far as it can. That's basically entropy as well. And you can, and that's like basically how you define. It's very roughly, like it's a bit more complicated, but like that's the basic idea how you define entropy in quantum physics. At least that's also how we did it, and that's also why you can use combinatory logic to calculate entropy in quantum physics, which is something you probably wouldn't use in. Yeah, you can use it in normal physics as well in thermodynamics. But anyway, I'm sorry, I completely just lost the track. But yes, you can use entropy as a measure of time, but it's not only that. Time is just the notion of change. If something changes, there was time. How much time it was, you can only say in relation to another thing changing. So, yeah.
Another example, you're caught in a time-travelling loop where you give an essential item to your past self, which you'll then in the future have to, of course, return to the past and give again to continue the loop. But because that item is constantly moving forward in time in a linear fashion as the loop continues, the object should age. That is to say,
Yes.
its entropy or disorder should increase.
Yes, that is a good point. That is a very marvelous point. Doesn't happen then. Like that's not within the frame of time travel logic I had. And this is one of the biggest mistakes people make. You have, if you write something like this, like an object that is, so to speak, eternal, like that has no start and end point, his argument here is perfectly on point. He's completely right here. That object would decay through the loops, so to speak. And then it would change the loops. So it's not a loop, it's a spiral then if you have an object like this, because one day it's gone. And you can spot bad time travel writing when it is like that. I like that. Yeah, that's a good point. So you have to pick up the object and place it down. Like it can't be the same object all the time. Like you have to resupply the object in one timeline, so to speak. Like you always have to, for example, get the object here and then go around and leave it here and then pick another one up here and the another one up becomes the one here, so to speak. Like that has to happen. Otherwise, he is completely right. It makes no sense. And it's not a time loop. It's a time spiral. Like it slowly changes. You can actually see that in Heaven Sent, of like Doctor Who episode Heaven Sent. That's a time spiral, so to speak. Like it changes a bit, and what changes in that story is like a wall that is being broken down, and because the wall has the entropy, because it's a time loop, and it's like a space created for a time loop to happen, but the edge of the space is obviously not anymore in the time loop, so the interactions with the outside like make exactly like this thing happen, like the entropy, like it changes all the time, and yeah. I really like that episode, one of the best episodes of television, and shout outs to Doctor Who fans, but let's continue.
But if that were true, then it should eventually deteriorate to a point beyond it becoming practically usable. It can no longer function as the essentially required
It's not a
object
loop, it's a
within
spiral
the event,
then.
and so the time loop would break down.
Yeah.
And at that point, nor could the loop have ever begun. In order for a time loop like this to exist, it would need to break the law of entropy. Now, of course, there are arguably a couple of ways around.
Yeah. That as well. He's completely right. Like, if you have this time spiral, the object has to be taken into the loop from the outside first as well. I forgot that. Yeah, he's right here. Like, if the object is brought from the future in the first place, it can't happen. But if you take the object into the time loop and then like give the object you took into the time loop to your past self, like then you change that a bit, and that's why it's a spiral. Like there it already changes a bit and then everything always changes a bit. Anyway.
That very specific example, like transcribing the book to a new book. But even then, where did the book originate? Where's the starting point? What if it was a more complex item?
That is something different. You can have information that is like just popped up, so to speak. That's weird. That's really weird. Like because it's information, like it's not something physical. Like you could be told something, then time travel, and then tell it to yourself, and that works. And that's like, how does it work? Like it's very counterintuitive, but it's completely logical. Fine. It's just like what? Perhaps there's a god then that made it happen. That's something. I don't know.
That you could not replicate. These are the kind of problematic paradoxes that occur with traveling to the past, as well.
Again, it's not a paradox. It's just weird to understand. Like, where did it come from? Apparently, it created itself. Weird, yes, but not illogical. Like, yes, paradoxical, but not illogical.
As giving
very important distinction.
Instructions that don't occur with traveling to the future, but especially with entropy in terms of using critical objects that create a recurring time event. Whereas traveling to the future, as I say, it doesn't have these problems, and so that's generally considered to be theoretically possible. These
Yeah, and again, the entropy still applies to the warp. Like if you go into the warp, your entropy on your time arrow, so to speak, it continues to deteriorate you, and then you get out on another point in the past or the future. Perfectly fine. And then if you go out, then you have the entropy like continue in the universe normally, just at another point. Like it's just the entropy of our universe, if you take that as a closed thing, just changes sometimes randomly if things get out and in of the warp. So yeah.
Closely related or even somewhat
Yeah,
ambiguous.
sorry, I look
Generally
probably a bit
speaking,
different,
though,
just had to
they
feed
are
my
what I have
children,
already
but
referred to as
yeah.
a closed time loop, which is exactly as it sounds, a closed period of time that continues to loop. So even if the Chaos Gods were able to move around through our linear timeline and take actions to influence events or even themselves, those events
Yes.
could become what is referred to, as we just said before, a closed time loop, specifically a predestination paradox.
Why is he like he's now talking about this for 30 minutes and he's saying the same stuff again and again and again and again? Why? That's weird. Like, I think we've talked about it. Like,
Or a bootstrap paradox.
yeah, it's
A
reasonable.
predestination paradox is where a series of events which could be perceived as the past.
Yeah, you
or
already
present
told me
lead to
3
a future
times.
event,
What's
and that
going
future
on?
event, though, will be the ultimate cause of the first event in the past. The reason why this is paradoxical is that the past event only occurs because of the action in the future event.
Yes.
Bootstrap paradox is very similar, but usually involves some physical object, like the book we mentioned previously. That object would then cause a series of events not dissimilarly to the predestination paradox. And
Yeah, bootstrap paradox only works with information, not with physical objects. We've discussed this. Thanks.
as we just covered, this is problematic because in a sense that object has never specifically originated from anywhere. It's a paradox. Examples of this would be events in movies like Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys and also The Terminator. In both these movies, the main characters are stuck in the described causal loops. In Terminator, a future self-aware AI, Skynet, sends the T-800 or Model 101 Terminator back through time to assassinate Sarah Connor in an attempt to alter the future. Her son John Connor sends Kyle Reese back also to try and save Sarah,
Yes.
while additionally already knowing that by doing so, Kyle will become his father in the past. When the Terminator is eventually destroyed, the leftover components of the T-800 Terminator sent by Skynet will enable the reverse engineering of the Terminator's CPU and other materials. Something that
Yeah, perfectly reasonable. Why is he stop telling me this? It's reasonable. Like, yes, it is of course what did you say? Unintuitive. But it's a perfectly reasonable thing. Like it doesn't break logic, it's just paradoxical if you use
scenes could not have occurred
like arrow
otherwise.
time.
In a deleted scene from the movie, we even discover that the facility where the final battle takes place between Sarah Connor, Kyle Reese and the Terminator is in fact an early stage site for Cyberdyne Systems. That was a scene removed from the original screening. Their arrival at this location at the end of the film seems accidental on the part of Sarah and Kyle, who are just running to find somewhere to escape. But in this chance decision, they set up a whole future chain of events. Events, of course, that paradoxically couldn't have happened were it not for the Terminator being sent to the past. And
I really like this. I have never seen Terminator. I've seen Terminator 2 a bit, and I've seen Terminator 3 a bit. Like, they were on TV, but the problem was I was not allowed to stay up late. So I only saw the first 15 minutes of Terminator 2 and 3. That sounds cool, but I think in Terminator 2, the future was changed a bit. I like it. I didn't know in Terminator 1 we had a predestination paradox. It's cool. It's a destiny trap. I love it. Like, that sounds cool.
this
Very
suggests,
good.
in contradiction to Sarah's assertion, things are actually locked into a time loop. Their arrival at the Cyberdyne facility may have just seemed random to them, but it could have in fact been predestined, and despite the illusion of it, they had no free will in deciding that they were going to arrive there. This is just
You know what? I love that. Because there is the predestination, you can't change anything, and you can like create a new future that diverges, like you go into a new future. Yes, the other one is like it still exists in a time like future bubble or whatever you want to say, but like it goes away and you create a new future. And every time I see a time travel story, I always wonder if it's the former or the latter. And it's always the question, will their actions matter in the end or not? And I love that. I love that in time travel. Like, as I said with Dark, the TV show, they play with that a lot, and it's brilliantly done.
One possibility, of course. Regardless though, these kind of causality loops could be created by any number of scenarios and involve objects or just information.
Just information is
So
possible,
returning to
otherwise it's
40K,
illogical.
Let's, for example, say you as a Chaos God gain information from your future self. This needn't be meeting yourself and having an actual one-to-one conversation, but regardless, you learn of a critical action you must take, say, influencing the Eldar into depravity at a certain point to ensure that you are born. Now, I'm not saying that's how it happened, but it's just an example of a predestination paradox.
Yeah, so what?
These causal loops nearly always have a paradoxical nature, which means you ultimately then become logically unable to determine where the cause occurs.
That's no problem. In this, I'm just restating it because he keeps restating it. That's not a problem. It's just unintuitive, but it's not a problem. You like causality of like, it doesn't mean there's no, yes, there is no causal beginning, but there is causality in this. Like this doesn't break causality, it just breaks the assumption that you have a beginning in causality. But the thing itself is, the causality still applies to the thing. Like, yes, it's unintuitive to not have a start and ending of causality. But you also only have that in the loop, like, because it's like, again, oh God, this stupid paper. Like, again, it's like the loop is like the time arrow goes into the loop, then there's the loop, and then it goes out again in most cases. Like, it's not just a closed loop forever. Like, yes, there is a loop, so to speak, but time before and after still exists in most cases.
Because if the cause was in the future, creating an effect in the past, you couldn't have reached that future.
Yeah, I get it, Luetin. Jesus frick, man. Yes, you keep saying for 50 minutes now.
Where you are unable to determine the origin of anything. And this is the final and most destructive impact of a causal loop. And it's something that is usually just put to one side in movies or general pop culture. And the reason it's put to one side is because it undermines the entire concept of past, present and future, because they are defined by causality.
I'm really sorry. He does not make sense. He doesn't. He confuses a lot of things here. That's a bit sad. Like, yes, no, it does not violate causality. It just violates the principle that, or the intuitive thing that you think is a thing, which is there is a start to causality. But the causality is still there. Like,
if a future action is capable of causing a past effect,
yes,
if that sequence of events is even feasible,
yes,
you can no longer say that the past is definitively the past. Once you've moved into the...
Yes, you can, because these things are relative to people's own timelines. They still have a past and future. Every single person has a past and future. It's not that they all have the same, which is also relativity, which is like something that's pretty basic, I think, but I think a lot of this could have been avoided, by the way. These problems I see with his arguments and his definitions and stuff. If he in the beginning just laid out the definitions, like I said, and then I could have immediately like pinpointed this in the beginning, and then we could have, or he could have seen it perhaps in the beginning that he should have thought further about that.
The future, the past, should already have happened and be inaccessible. And so these time-traveling sequences of events render linear time essentially meaningless. And this is the big problem with all this kind of stuff.
Why?
Now, the whole point of talking about this...
You can't just say that. Like, oh man, I'm so sad. He just misunderstood what linear means. Linear doesn't mean one direction. It doesn't. It just means proportionality. What?
This, I hope, is beginning to become obvious. That it highlights just how problematic the concept of a realm without any laws of time actually is, along hand in hand with the whole Chaos Gods have always existed spiel. Now, as I said from the beginning, it sounds simple enough when you see it or hear it as a passing quote or an offhand remark by somebody talking about law and the Chaos Gods. When you actually start to engage the brain and you think about it further and what no time and always having existed actually means, it creates any number of fairly major problems.
No, I'm sorry, no. I agree with him. Again, I agree on some parts with him, like the always existed thing. It might be the mortar thing, that it's like the mortar between the universes, the warp. Then yes, it existed forever. but no time. As far as I understood it, it just means that not everyone has the same passage of time. Like time is personal in the warp, so to speak. And we saw that. And I have not seen a logical problem with this presented here. I've just seen stuff that is perhaps not layman intuitive, but everything I heard him quote here was making sense in a way. And it was very, very well built. I have the feeling he did not give them enough credit for their world building here, actually. I know he's a law guy and he probably knows a lot better than me, so I don't know if me saying this bears any weight at all, but I think he does not give them credit enough for what they thought up. Because for me, the warp stuff, all of it has been logical. It hasn't been layman physics, one time direction arrow thing. Conform, yes, but if you look deeper into physics and possibilities and theories we have and hypotheses we have, this is all in line with what could be. If you assume the warp is this emotional thing where perhaps distances are like the closer emotionally you are, the less time it takes and stuff like that might be things you could play around with. It's not been stated, of course, and I'm not going to go into it being like this is how it is. I imagine it could be like this, fan fiction. But what we do know is people can travel through the warp. They have personalized time as everyone always has after relativity. And that the warp is connected, therefore, through like different places and times. And it can potentially, in the warp, you can potentially look into the future. But it is all predetermined because both warp and the universe together form a single entity of predetermined things. It's just that the determination is mediated by causation in space-time in our universe, or not in our layer, in our materium, and through emotional closeness or like whatever warp causality you have in the warp, and those together only create the predetermination. And that's what I think is the thing, summed up what we discussed today till now. And that is perfectly logical internally and makes perfect sense. And it's just counterintuitive to Newtonian physics, not even Einsteinian physics. Like this would almost certainly follow from Einsteinian physics.
And
if you expand it with some
40K,
warp stuff, I
warp
guess.
Has no laws of time. Fine. We understand that now to be
it just does not have laws, what?
The case. From there, things
and then again, you read this from accounts of people that might not know them. Like
get even more complicated.
Not knowing doesn't mean not existing.
They already were.
It's a fallacy.
Because if we're talking about the concept of time in just one reality, one dimension, that of our own, say, material realm, we might be able to rationalize and make some conclusions about that. Perhaps to do with how those in such a reality observe time and so on. Or even getting into tackling about multiple timelines, etc., right? But in 40K, it's not just one reality. And this is where it becomes difficult to reasonably reconcile, because you have two realms with extremely contradicting laws, somehow apparently coexisting, and worse, also connected with each other.
Yeah, no problem. In physics, we would say I just do a coordinate shift. That's all you would do. It's like normal physics you do. Like when you go from materium to immaterium, if you know what the metric in the immaterium is, which means, so in physics, it's like this. Everything you calculate distances in, you have to say how you calculate the distance. Like you might say if there are 2 points, you calculate the distance by giving the length they are apart, or by giving the time you travel from one to the other. Like you have to say how you measure the distance, and it might be by length, by time, it might be by something else. You have to say that, and that's called a metric, so to speak. It's a bit more, but roughly that. And so the warp might have the same thing. It probably does. It might be emotion. Like I completely fan headcanon. I don't know anything that proves that. Just some hints that like different people that do the same travel experience it differently. Leads me to the conclusion that the metric of distance in the warp might be emotional, something like emotional distance. And then you have it. So you just have to coordinate shift those. Done. I'm sorry, what?
Having a dimension that sits
like
parallel.
It's mathematically complicated, but in principle, like
one
not.
With linear time and one without is so extremely difficult to come to a reasonable resolution.
No.
Not to mention that
I
if
hope
you
I
read
just
the
gave
lore
you one.
as it is, back in the very early period of the galaxy or the universe, the materium and the immaterium apparently were not even as closed off from one another as they are in the present age of the Imperium, which I will make some vague expansions on in future videos. But again, if you just think about that confliction there, it's just massively problematic. Still.
No. Again, sheets. We can all explain this with the stupid post-its I found on my desk. Okay, it was like this in the past and this in the present on average. Like, and if you want to say this is the past and this is the present, it's like this. This is how they are in time. No problem.
Let's try and just
I
take
hope
what we do
you understand
now.
what I mean.
Warp
I might
exists
make
as a
no
realm
sense. I
without
hope it was
time
clear what
that
I did,
interacts
at
with
least
our
in
material realm,
some
which
ways.
it does. And that brings us to backwards causation.
Okay, God. Oh, God. Yeah, tell me, please.
We've now covered and understand the nature of causal paradoxes, and often discussions around chaos and the warp lead to the idea that those demons and gods who exist within the warp would be able to, and we know have, influence or cause effects in what we would see from our linear perception as the past. It's worth reminding that the chaos gods themselves pay extremely minimal attention to the mortal realm. They only take note when events or individuals shine extremely brightly, and from that you could fairly...
Yeah, because that means if we take my stupid fan theory of distances are calculated by, like, emotional closeness, so if you shine like a light, that basically means you jump into the chaos god in the warp. Like, your soul as an avatar, or your mind as an avatar in the chaos all the time, and if you start having these emotions close to the gods, you take your soul and ram that into them. Of course they're gonna notice you. What?
assume most of the time they are either entirely unaware of anything that we would describe as time. Instead, they merely now and then see an action or sequence of events that they choose to engage with, or perhaps consequently have little true free will over such things, and just somehow know that they have to play their role.
I like that though, that he considers the possibility of the chaos gods being under predetermination as well. Predestination. Yeah, the problem is he draws one arrow of time here. You should draw for every thing, you should draw its own arrow, and then, yeah, whatever.
Let us consider having two dimensions existing in parallel, one with apparently no time and one with linear time, is inherently illogical, because somehow being able to connect to a realm free of causality and without time creates so many conceptual problems. But just for argument's sake, if you were able to exist in, say, an adjacent dimension where time had no meaning, if so, would that be a physical journey? Or would it be more like a sea of invisible information, thoughts, feelings, memories, instinctive gut feelings, just randomly becoming apparent, vague, and somewhat like a precognition? How can we reconcile this idea of backwards causation caused by those in the warp in our material reality? That is to say, future events causing actions in the past. Well, it brings us to where all this has been leading to, which is that we have to consider looking at things from what is called an eternalist view of time. And
yes, haven't we been doing this all this video? Of course, like that. I thought that was a given. Like, how else would you think about this? Yeah.
this states that time is symmetrical. Essentially what it's saying is that the past, present and future all already exist. The sensation of what we would refer to as the present is just an effect of human consciousness.
Yes, exactly that. So if you take this diagram, perfect diagram, thanks. So if you take this, there is like this arrow here with a person, that arrow here is a person, that arrow here is a person, like I'm drawing arrows. This is a person, this is a person. Like, and you can, sometimes you go here, you go into the warp, and the warp does like this, I don't know, and leads you there. But you like traveled a further distance than this. Perfect. Thanks for the illustration.
An illusion. but that in reality our conscious mind and subsequent decisions have no actual bearing on how events play out. There's some evidence in the law that points toward the concept of causality being absent, and that there are no restrictions on past, present and future. In Rise of the Inari Wild Rider, the Eldar Farseer
What does that... Again, because he hasn't defined causality well enough in the beginning, in my opinion, this makes no sense. Like, there's no causality. Yes, there's still causality in this eternalist whatever thing.
Ulthuan describes how raw warp power knows nothing of causality. Here there was no boundary to what had been, what was, and what might come to pass. The description of what might come to pass, I think, is either a personal view of Ulthuan or trying to keep some mystique about events. But in order for things to...
Also here, it doesn't know means it doesn't know consciously, so it doesn't have it in mind. But if we assume the chaos goes in the warp are subconscious mainly, that again is another way of interpreting this as well.
To really make sense, we have to accept that all these things exist. The Eldar do regularly make mention throughout their lore and narratives to cyclical time, and their very society is built around concepts of cycles, which point heavily toward an eternalist point of view.
Yeah.
So keeping that in mind, you might begin to see from its description of all things already existing as to why I said earlier, time travel has a habit of making things become much less enjoyable, because no one likes to think that their actions have already taken place and that free will is an illusion.
Why? That's a very weird ad hoc claim, because it's always the thing. Like if you ascribe to physics, yeah, like now talking about the real world here, like it's all predetermined. Like we don't, like for us, from our point, it will never be solved how this is, because quantum physics is uncertain in principle from our view, but the quantum realm, so to speak, is predetermined as well. And we just don't know how. We will never know how. That's like, it's nature, because we are living in a dimension, so to speak, or we are beings that cannot perceive the quantum physical wholeness, so to speak. Never can. It's impossible for us. So it doesn't matter if it's like, perhaps it isn't even predetermined, and we know, but you know, it is a very heavily implied, at least, that there is a lot of determinism, and even if there's not, at least you are determined, like in like brain signals are like what you are if you want to go there. Like you're just brain signals, and some brain regions will activate and then do your thoughts. So you can predict thoughts 5 seconds or so, or 3 milliseconds. I don't know the timescale, but you can predict them before they are in your head, where if you measure the brain waves. So you're not that free of will. You're not. Like, you're very, very limited of will anyway. So like, what's the problem here? Isn't that horror? You can't change it. I mean, I get he doesn't like it. That's fine. That is fine. But first of all, it's all a story. So it doesn't matter that, like, just the statement it's all predetermined doesn't matter if you don't know the outcome. I talked about that before, but I think that's important, because if you don't know the outcome and know it's predetermined, what does it matter? Like, doesn't matter. It's like a useless statement. Like, why is that interesting? If you don't know the outcome, if you know the outcome, then it is horror, because you can't change it. And if it's a terrible outcome, which it is in this world, because everything's fucked, it's horror. So I don't get his point here.
Because it basically makes everything seem meaningless. And that's what happens when you start interjecting time.
Meaningless. It's horror.
Time travel, or impossible to reconcile concepts like no laws of time all over the place. Still, we have to enable the idea of backwards causation to work, as it's something that's already established in 40k, so...
Yeah, man, this really comes off as him raging at that they introduced that. Because every time he's talked about it, it's like, yes, it's pretty much predestination, we know it from the lore, but he's always interjecting his own opinion of it being shitty, because he doesn't like it. That's so weird, he never did that before. Like, how many Luetin videos have I watched of 40? He never did this. At least to my knowledge, but here, this is very, very, very subjective video, weird. like he tries to be informative, but it's basically, hey, predestination is in the law. It's pretty much a thing, and I hate it. Here's why. And I hate it. It makes no sense because I don't like it. Because all the arguments he had are like boiled down to I don't like it. Because he's trying to be like, yes, I know how physics works and how philosophical it works and so on and so forth. But he's very shallow. And I don't mean that like, I don't mean that offensively. Perhaps he doesn't know better. But and thinks it's the whole thing that there is. But many of his arguments rely on very unprecise definitions he makes, very shady. Not shady. That's also. I don't want this to be like so negative because I know he probably thought a lot about this. And when I had not studied physics, I would have thought about this similarly, I think. So like he's perfectly in line with what he does here. But like from what I know now, like everything he talked about was no problem. Just because he didn't like it in the end, he made it into a problem because he could have interpreted or given definitions more precisely and been a bit more careful with some of his words, like the distinction between illogical and paradoxical. Because paradoxical, as I said, is just a logic break in the logic system. So you have to change the logic system and add some hypothesis or theory. And that's what physics always does. And that's why it grows. That's how we got general relativity. That's how we got quantum physics. Exactly that, because we found paradoxical things. Then we had to try to reconcile them with theories. And that's why we grew in physics. That's the point. You need paradoxa. Otherwise, you're done. You don't need research anymore. Like, so, and he's saying basically, if there's a paradox, it's illogical. It's shit. That's completely not how it works.
We accept the idea of an eternalist view of time.
Okay, if time travel to the past were possible, then backwards causation is possible. Okay, yeah, yes, that's true. If backward causation is possible, you know that causal loops would also be possible. Yes. Yet, if causal loops were possible, uncaused events in those time loops would be possible. What? Yet, if causal loops were possible, uncaused events in those time loops would be possible. No, that's wrong. They will still be caused. There's just not one first cause, but they are all caused. 3 is wrong. 3 is logically false. So I like, though, what he did here was an argument reconstruction from philosophy. I did that a lot in university when I studied philosophy. So you break it down into arguments and then you can like form conclusions. But 1, 2, 3, and 4 all have to be true. So backwards time travel is impossible. So it is. If I want to attack his arguments, I have to attack one of these 4 points and show that in my argument that's not true. So you can't conclude this. And in my mind, 3 is not true because he hasn't defined causation carefully enough. Causation is just that one thing causes the other. But and one thing causes the other on one time arrow, so to speak. But it says nothing about a start and nothing about an ending. That's not what causation says. Never. Like, that makes no sense. It is a very limited view on causation. So linear causation, that's what he's talking about here. So yeah, so my criticism on this reconstruction would be 3 is not true. 3 is false. This is not a correct thing to say. Uncaused events are logically impossible. That as well is true. Uncaused events are logically impossible. That is true, but it is not that uncaused events in those time loops would be possible. That's not true. No causal beginnings would be possible, but that's not what he says here. And that's why this argument reconstruction is unfortunately not correct. And ex nihilo paradox. So this must be a paradox. This must be a philosophical paradox. Like, it's not his reconstruction, I think. So whoever constructed this in philosophy, this is your mistake, from my mind. Because you use causality in a linear, like in this time, like one direction arrow that goes and is going onwards, then yes, this might be a 3 might be something that's true. Yes, but it is a view on causality that is not supported by relativity actually anymore. I hope I didn't bore you with this
Must then
short
accept
thing.
that future events already exist in order to have causal loops in what we could call the past. Something else which points to this is an Eldar myth known as the Cosmic Serpent. The serpent is the only
Ouroboros,
creature believed
probably.
to exist in both the material and the psychic realm at the same time. Hence, the serpent is said to be all-knowing across all of time. This probably also points towards some visions and concepts of Ouroboros and other things which are relative to the various different pieces in the whole puzzle.
Oh,
So
oops,
as
I'm sorry. It's bad forward. So yeah, snake. That only means like for me that I would interpret that as yes, the materium and the immaterium are still like one thing. The snake is everything. And yeah, that's what I get from it. I might be completely wrong. I just heard that snippet, so I don't know. Anyway.
we already discussed, when we then come to the idea of causal loops, we no longer have any way of defining where a chain of events began.
So what?
There's also no choice involved because otherwise it becomes logically impossible.
So what?
This gives us the unfortunate conclusion that there's no free will involved in anything. Let's just
Yes. Isn't that terrible?
sidestep around that quite depressing and extremely dull conclusion.
Yes, it's depressing and dull because this is cosmic horror, mate. What?
By using a philosophical argument that any mortal's conscious perception of free will is something you truly feel to your very core, and that whether such a sensation is real in any metaphysical sense is ultimately irrelevant and unquantifiable to you. You are unable to perceive your actions any other way other than being through your own free will.
Yes, it's perfectly fine as well, I think. That's why it's so terrible. I think he's right here. So you would want free will. Like, it's a very deep want of people. If someone tells you you're not free, there's no free will in you, like, that's bad. Especially in Western culture, like the freedom of will and speech is like this pillar of everything. And it's so important. So if someone came along and told you you have no free will, it's basically saying you are a slave forever and you are never truly free. And that's terrible. And that's why I get this. It's a bit of a very positive fantasy wishing, unfortunately. But it's still, yeah, I get why you would try to say that. But and even if it's not the case, if you don't know, what doesn't matter, I would say.
So to all intents and purposes, free will does exist. Or to put it more simply, what we're saying is, let's just not think about that too much, because it makes things very boring, as I said. Time travel.
That's so sad. He's coming with the boring. Why is it boring? That's the thing I would have loved him to explain to me. Why do you think it's boring? You said it's depressing and dull. Isn't that horrifying? And again, if you don't know the outcome and you know it's predetermined, it also doesn't matter. The same way as if you have free will and you don't know, or can't prove it and just assume it and live by it. Like, yeah, fine, it's fine. But I would have loved him to say why he thinks it's boring.
Unfortunately, to make this mess of conflicting concepts work, the eternalist view is the only one that allows us to put together some of these pieces of the puzzle. So then, with this idea that everything already exists across time, that would mean the Chaos Gods can surely see the end game. They can and should already know every single action to take, right? Because they can see everything. Well, obviously.
Well, not necessarily see everything. They are just connected to every point in space-time they are drawn to, so to speak.
It clearly can't work that way, otherwise it already would have, and they already would have done. We could consider though that just as you may suddenly become aware of a memory from your past, or something in the present that triggers a feeling from your memory, the same could be said, but in reverse here. It would be more like a feeling or a vision of a future event, but without it literally having been delivered to you via some interaction or object, as per our previous examples. Movies like...
I have to stop clicking. It's irrelevant. If it's everything is predetermined and you see a future 10,000 years in the future where the Chaos Gates haven't taken over, they can't take over. That's the point. Like, they can't change anything. They're predestined as well. Like, he's making it out as if the Chaos Gates were not bound to this, but he said earlier as well they were. And I also think that's what I conclude from his evidence. So
Arrival touch on this idea of eternalist time and on perceiving memories from your past and future. These feelings would be more like a sense of purpose washing over you, where you didn't know where in time you
I like
were,
this interpretation
only that you
though a
gain
lot.
a sense of purpose or an understanding that such a thing has to happen. Maybe you receive information in a vision, but until a subsequent event occurs, you are perhaps unsure of how that information is usable.
yeah, that is
It could
perfectly
be that in the
reasonable.
warp, because of its abstract, lawless nature, certain feelings or memories from what we could see as the past or the future only become brighter and more apparent when they align with events from our perceived linear interpretation of time. A time-like alignment
Or the
of
feelings.
sense and events. That events in our reality could create situations predetermining causal loops, then requiring actions by those entities in the warp. Now, I came to this from thinking about what I said earlier.
That's brilliant.
where
Yes, I agree here with him completely. That's basically also what I said, but
the difficulty of existing in a realm with
That's
no
why I
concept
agree.
of
I'm
time
sorry.
could prevent you from taking any specific pointed actions in the material realm, but also us knowing that they have apparently already taken some specific actions, which then have caused these closed time loops. If you couldn't easily actually locate that moment, you'd have to feel compelled to do it by some other process, perhaps even outside of your own conscious free will. So in a realm where time is non-linear or even non-existent, such as the warp, you could become aware of time as more of a cyclical or even a completely abstract concept, or more simply perhaps just no concept of it at all. Example: in your mind you suddenly have memories or information you previously were unaware of, more specifically of actions you feel a compelling need to take
Yeah.
to ensure a certain event occurs.
yeah, that's cool. That's
It
a
might
cool
be
thing.
so compelling
like that.
you cannot resist the need, even outside of your own will. You might see a whole sequence of events where
But if you feel them so compellingly, isn't that part of your will? What does he define as your own will here? That as well. Like, that's the thing with these kinds of discussions, and he does a marvelous job at starting them here. Many, many brilliant thoughts to be had about what he said in this video. I commend him for that greatly. But this is the thing. What's will for you here? Tell me. If you can't tell me what exactly it is, it's just a very wishy word, and it gets imprecise. Like, why would he argue here that this compelling thing, like the vision from the future or something, why is it not part of your free will then? Or why is free will not something like that as well? Like he just said, yeah, wouldn't it be cool to have free will? Some philosophers said, yeah, it would just be cool. So let's not worry about it. It's not an argument, by the way. It's just could be cool. And then he's using that to say, yeah, that's probably what he uses to distinguish the free will he thinks about from the future free will. But if you feel so compelled, why is it not your free will? What do you understand as free will precisely? I think he should have said that as well. What is free will? Definition. As I said, again, then we could have at least talked about what he means.
specific actions were necessary, or that you at least felt were necessary, but maybe were unaware of the order or the implications until other events occurred first.
And by the way, again, God, this video is going to be so long. Again, if you're still here, thank you so much. Consider liking it or tell me what I did wrong. But yeah, and as well, your consciousness is rooted on top, seated on top of your subconsciousness. So every time you feel an urge, it's your subconsciousness drawing in. So your free will of like the consciousness, it's not free. Like it's still, it is just something your body uses to use excess inner energy to calculate what potential future things might be that are good. That's consciousness, what it's for. Like, it's pretty pragmatic, you know? Subconsciousness is still the basics of what you are. You are mostly subconsciousness. So free will would be what? What would free will be? Well, like how? How would that even work biologically, free will? Like what? Like, I need that argument. Like, it's probably you can make a case for it. I'm sure you can, but he didn't make it. He just said free will, and that's enough for him. Like, what do you mean, mate?
This
What?
would then cause you to take actions similarly to Horus in order to bring about the resulting predestined events.
Okay, the most likely
So
scenario.
with all of this said, I cannot conclude that all of the Chaos Gods have always been fully manifested in the warp, despite it even stating in the lore in regard to Slaanesh. Now calm down, okay? Sit back down, because the key word here for me is fully manifested. I find it very difficult to accept the concept of Slaanesh always having existed, because seriously think about it. It's very difficult to reconcile the contradictions and problems such a truth would represent. If they have always existed, how were there times when the Eldar, for example, don't have to worry about their souls being devoured?
Yes.
That was a long time. Or
Yes.
that through the period of galactic Eldar dominion, they weren't wrought then by feelings of
So, to recap, they were always subconsciously there, but then they awoke and started their own time arrows, and they might have crossed a bit into the past and future, but they still have their own time that's developing for them.
wanting to slaughter each other, scheming to subvert their peaceful time. Yet later, seemingly out of nowhere, things spiral out of control. If Slaanesh always
And of course they can't go to places in the past then, because they're not emotionally close to them and they can't travel those distances.
had existed, why didn't that happen right out of the gate? Now look, there's a lot more to it than that. But I think in actuality where we find ourselves here is back at the mercy of semantics, especially when the only source for such statements are as his rival gods reckon it. Because that's what it
Okay.
says in the Codex. Slaanesh has existed for all time as his rival gods reckon it. To me, this just comes across as the other gods' perception, and not necessarily having any literal bearing on strictly how long.
Yeah, then it makes even more sense. If the other gods say it was always there as we perceived it, and they're perceiving it subconscious as well because it's emotional, very likely subconscious. I think you can make that argument because, as I said, emotions are mainly subconscious. So if they feel Slaanesh, like the subconscious Slaanesh, they feel that.
Something has existed. If anything, it could suggest the opposite, that they perceive Slaanesh has always existed, but they only see things that way because they have no point of reference, no way of gauging it or describing it. They can't say that that's
That
the
as well,
past
but
and
I
this is
don't
the
think
future.
so.
So to them, it seems like Slaanesh has always existed because they can't understand it any other way. With all that said, I would be fine with the concept that they may have
Ooh, that's a
existed forever
creepy
in some
thing.
sense. Being that the warp is a sea of souls and emotional energy, I could very much entertain the idea that for a long time before becoming self-aware, a Chaos God would be a mass and reactive formation of compatible emotional energies, and that this formation could reach out and touch the minds of mortals as and when it
That's what I said an hour ago, mate. Why did you talk an hour about the paradox shit? Mate, he was really mad at that, right? Like, he could have just said that. That is the conclusion I came to 5 minutes into the video. And it's always what I felt when I heard that. So, what? What?
felt compelled to do so, even before it was born into the warp in truth and became conscious. For example, if we assume the gods have always existed in some
Also, by the way, I'm sorry, this what I said with the energy, like you are just, the consciousness is something, like you have excess energy and you use that, so to speak, your organism can use that to predict the future and act a bit more precisely. Same with that, like she got energy from so many elders suddenly, and it was excess energy probably, so it made consciousness grow. Brilliant writing again, and he doesn't give it credit here, I have to say that.
some sense within
Like
the
he
warp,
doesn't give the
Slaanesh
credit
may
of the
have
warp
suddenly
right.
found that
He
memories or
doesn't
emotional
get
instincts
give
from
the warp
future of
writing its credit.
creation
I feel a
before it's
bit.
really properly sentient, as a purely instinctual entity to reach out and begin to try and influence the Eldar, who
It probably didn't even reach out. They ran into it.
Due to
If
other
what I
reasons
think
are
is
also
correct.
kind
That's
of
even more
weakened at this point.
stupid.
So
Like, I
Slaanesh
love
will
it.
have been creating, but was maybe severely worsening the Eldar slide down into depravity before their eventual
Yeah, they might have then
annihilation.
interactions,
As
but
I
they
already
ran
said,
into
the
her, had
concept of a
interactions
chaos god
better.
being
She
physically
exploded
manifested
from
within the warp
overflowing
for all
emotional
time,
energy and
yet
created its
also
consciousness
specifically
thing,
being
perhaps.
born through events by its adjacent material realm literally makes no sense whatsoever, and that should be obvious. Not only because of the connected events of the material realm, but also just by the definition of their whole nature, that the Chaos Gods use psychic energy and souls from mortal creatures. And this is why the thinking that I've seen some people say before, that the birth of a god is a point in time that we see, but that they have truly existed throughout all of time. That doesn't make sense once you actually start to think beyond just that description. Instead, the idea that for me seems most plausible is, again, it's a little bit semantics. The sense that the Chaos Gods have always existed, but specifically not as a literal warp manifested form. Okay?
Yes,
So they
I
have
agree,
always
I agree.
existed, but from our point of view, they haven't always been there and even been there to influence things.
Yes.
They are of the
Yes,
warp
because they were in the background and you didn't realize them. So these constructs, they are now...
as much as the warp is them. And when it comes to specific events, knowledge, or actions that would then create a closed time loop, it's impossible to say definitively just how that functions. In a reality where time simply doesn't exist, it's hard to imagine that the gods can be aware of such minuscule moments in time when time for them doesn't exist in any perceivable sense. My personal conclusion is that they only become aware of information and actions through a very chaotic, perhaps even a random process, which to me seems somehow all the more appropriate. There is no clearly defined or documented explanation.
Yeah, and by them being, so to speak, instruments to assure that everything is predestined, yeah, that could be that there's randomness involved as well. That would be also so fucked.
For how any of this works.
That might mean there is a god that created all of this and is fucking with everything.
This is the only way I've been able to reconcile having a dimension with no concept or perception of time that is not only adjacent to, but also interacting with a realm which has a very contradictory, well-defined perception of time as a linear unidirectional stream.
Again.
Now, when we eventually come to the third video, I will flesh out things a lot more, but just simply, I don't believe the Chaos Gods have always been manifested. Yet, as I said, they may have been largely present in some form or state.
Yeah, I agree with them
there. What it comes
there.
down to, though, really, is that this idea of the warp being devoid of time is problematic. It does, to be sure, provide plenty of material for our amusement.
Yeah, it is not devoid of, it is devoid of the time we know. I agree with that probably. I need to read the exact wordings of the places of the sources, actually.
I love the idea that I've seen said somewhere before that for some Chaos Space Marines who exist in the warp, the Black Crusades, from their perception, are more like a weekly event, where they return through the Eye of Terror, regroup quickly, restock, and right lads, let's get back out there, we're going to smash the Imperium this time, when in actuality as they emerge from the warp, for humanity it's been like 1,000 years. And this kind of thing is illustrated, as I said earlier, in the Night Lord's novel, Voidstalker.
Yeah, it's perfectly...
And here's the other thing, anybody can spin off wild theories about what lies beyond. For example, maybe we've only seen the first Chaos Gods, maybe there are more than 4. Perhaps the warp is the true reality and we're living in a false illusion of reality. Maybe the warp is not a localized mirror of our galaxy, but of the whole or many universes, and it's all just so far beyond our comprehension.
Yeah, the latter part, doesn't matter.
You get the idea. If I spent some significant time joining random dots of lore together, I'm sure I could conjure up an endless stream of mad theories about origins and the future of things, if I felt compelled to do so. Because just randomly fitting ideas into an already very fragmented framework isn't that hard to do.
I really think that's not fragmented. For me, the warp currently, after this video, especially with what he brought me as evidence, did a good job at that. Very good job at providing scenarios and documents where this was tackled. From all of them, I think it's very, very, very clear what it is. It's almost out of the question for me that it's something different now. Might be confirmation bias, but it all makes perfect sense. I don't see contradictions to what he says here, and he's telling it like it was still he's trying his best of figuring it out. And for me, it's a very clear picture what it is. So weird.
Is that
perhaps I'm dumb.
Can think up some crazy nonsense, because when you have no restrictions, you can make anything work and just fit and adjust the pieces as you go along. In doing so, you're likely to find yourself eventually stranded too far or badly contradicting other elements that you never considered. And then you're no longer operating within the universe that has been created and exists.
Yeah.
This is why often when I see posts from people starting off stating that their theory is based around other theories, and maybe even a theory based off of some unofficial fanfiction.
Yeah, that's really shitty. I agree here. You can't just put in random shit into the story. That's true though.
You usually find people exiting pretty quickly, because while it's fun, If all we're doing is an exercise in creative writing, it's subjectively pointless in terms of trying to understand the official law that is. But to be clear, please understand, I'm not suggesting that fanfiction is pointless. In fact, I hope to get into writing some of my own stuff soon, but I personally only enjoy fanfiction when that exists within the established law and
I
boundaries.
agree here as well.
Because when you start reaching out wildly beyond that, it's no longer part of the actual world we're invested in. So I hope that's clear and all makes sense.
Yep.
What's actually a difficult undertaking, and why I think so often we see people referring to say things like, well, I don't have a source, but let me tell you what I think. It's because taking what you already know and combining it with the documented history, the constraints of reality as we know it, and limiting yourself to only a few established pieces to make sense of the puzzle, then having to find a way to make those pieces fit, is a much more challenging task and actually often requires some deep thought, even additional reading. And that's just not so easy.
Yeah.
Think about it like this, okay? Adding extra dots to join the dots is all well and good, so long as you're placing them where seems appropriate and not just all over the place.
Yeah, that is
because
true.
otherwise, you're going to end up with a picture that looks nothing like at all what was originally designed. And for some people, that might be what they want. But I personally want to know what the original image was.
Yeah.
It's like
I get
finding a
that.
few pieces of a puzzle and then cutting out the missing ones you want with any pattern to make it fit.
I don't know why, but in this video he says something, then he says the same thing again in another sentence, then he says the same thing again in another sentence.
Technically,
It's a bit
yes,
weird.
you have formed, laid out and finished your puzzle, but by just making up your own pieces which don't even match with the original as you went along, it's self-defeating, and in the end, whilst you have filled in all the gaps, it just looks wrong. My personal opinion is that most people want to use the official pieces of the puzzle, and maybe speculate where the blank pieces may go, or what
that's
pieces are
fine.
needed to fit, but always building those guesses reasonably off of what is already set, even if that means having to live with a few blank spaces toward the edge. But at least they know that those pieces that they do have are the right pieces.
Yes. But you know what? As I said, for me it sounded like there is evidence, and what I previously thought as well, it fit pretty good with it. And to me, I did not learn that much new stuff, just confirmed what I knew, which is dangerous. So it might be confirmation bias and might be wrong on this stuff. Very, very possible as might be. I would need to discuss it really with people and go through it with people face to face, I think, now, because everything else would be stupid. But for me, the warp stuff, as I said, it's pretty clear what the rules are and what it is about and how you could look at it. Without adding anything as well. I think in what I said, I didn't really add anything. I just explained some pictures with post-its. So do you think that added a lot? I don't know.
So at the end of this first video, we've learned about the basic framework which is important to understand before we deal with the rest. So what I'm going to do is illustrate for you my best conceptualization of the warp's relationship to the material reality, including the issues around time. And this is as follows.
Let's go.
Imagine the warp is a vast and infinite ocean. Scattered across that ocean are islands that are vast distances apart.
Yep.
These islands are the material worlds that exist in our reality, each representing and linked with all others. The complete and invisible process of linear time, or the eternalist time, as perceived by those who live in the material realm, is always there and overlays this whole realm of the materium. The two realms are inexorably connected.
But then it would also influence the ocean.
One is constantly shifting.
I know
and
it's hard
tides
with
and
pictures.
currents. It
I'm
can be
just
very dangerous,
kidding, yeah.
but relatively calm. At certain times it can be ferocious, crashing and lashing itself against the solid islands or forming dangerous vortices out on the ocean itself, sometimes isolated, other times enveloping islands or whole sections and cutting off worlds from the others. Were they to be so enveloped by storms, it's possible that they could even exist outside of the constant time of the material realm, at least until those storms subside, and it returns to a state of relative calm, but some areas may always be turbulent. Upon these islands exist powerful, bright entities trapped in corporeal vessels, and these are the souls of mortal creatures, not the Eldari though. And when these mortal spirits are released from their vessels, their energy, especially when released en masse, could be envisaged as a seismic force, having a more powerful effect upon the shifting current and relative state of calm of the ocean in the other realm. The continual seeping of emotions and conscious thought into the ocean of the warp is more like a gradual shifting of temperature and salinity, creating
Okay, but how do you reconcile like the sentience part you just mentioned?
movement to the
I'm curious
coalescing
now.
emotional
Let's see.
forces within the Sea of Souls itself. The more severe the seismic force, the more powerful the resulting storm or extreme event can be. The ever-changing wax and wane of galactic emotions directly relative to how strongly the ocean breaks upon the shores of reality. You may then imagine specific events that occur as vessels or flotsam that are permanently moored to the solid land and realm of reality, yet upon the ocean they can drift and move around in an incomprehensible state of random disorder.
Yes, but the time travel's now not anymore in it. It's just like thoughts disturb the space around you. That's what you say. It's like you could have just said, yes, imagine your thoughts disturb the space around you. It can disturb it so much that you can't pass through it. You don't need the island here.
They're never set at permanent coordinates from the perspective of those in the warp itself. Some may appear always to be adjacent, even connected. Others are not at all ordered. Importantly, no matter their actual position upon the ocean at any moment, they are always permanently tethered or moored to a specific, unchanging point on the solid land of reality. And no matter the forces, tides and storms on the ocean itself, that position will not change. From the land though, unlike the confusing disorder of the ocean, these tethered moments always appear in their same position, specific and never changing. So then we go one step deeper.
What are you talking about? So what does the tether represent? I thought it's planets and the space between them what the ocean is, but now it's suddenly not. It's the dimension below and what
exist within the further depths of the ocean. They are the gods or the monsters of this realm. Some of these vessels, these events that float at random upon the ocean, are tethered by a second line to them. They can be tethered to demons or other entities or multiple entities that exist and reside in the warp. And while they are technically able to see all the events of the material reality at once existing as they do within the ever-shifting deep currents of the ocean, it can be difficult to see those events with clarity. Perhaps when certain events that are directly connected to an entity within the ocean, that psychic tether tugs and pulls like a fishing line to get there.
Okay, I get it. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That analogy is fine. It's weird that yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, the island thing. Yeah, I like it. Okay,
Attention.
I take back what I just said. It's very sensible. I like that picture. Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense. The problem is just that time is already in the ocean, still in the ocean. And I think it is, but it's completely distorted by the currents, which is also what would fit. So yeah.
Yet unlike fishing, one is always hooked to the line, and the chance.
It's also like in this metaphor he uses here. It's also the same with the linear time. It doesn't exist. You see it here. Like if you go from one isle to the other, and there's a storm in between, like you don't just go the distance. You go like a different distance because the waves press you to the side or something. Like it's not going to be the same time you always need. And it's in line with it as well. It's so cool. I like it.
Very small, if not impossible.
Very nice analogy.
Pulls, the actions that are needed are just a matter of course. The difficult thing for us to reconcile is whether or not the future has already happened. All things considered, we may have to accept that this is in fact the case.
Yeah, because that's not in his thing, as I said, the future thing.
Because not only does that actually play out in some of the different races in the galaxy in terms of their lore, but it also makes the most logical sense in terms of the restrictions that exist and that we have to work around. Also knowing that one reality through established events inevitably interacts with the other. No matter their present actions, they will always be connected to specific events, and those events will always be connected to the land of reality, where they occupy a specific and ordered point in time from the perspective of those who exist upon that solid landmass.
Again, he should have used images here. That would have made this perfect.
Now all of this is fairly difficult to reasonably reconcile. It's certainly open to individual interpretation.
I think it's not hard to reconcile at all, but yes, it is up to individual interpretation in the end, I agree.
To me, this is how I loosely and very simplistically imagine the relationship between the warp and reality. The disorder of one is in many ways irrelevant to the other. In the warp, time has no specific meaning, but the events seen from the ocean...
Aha, no specific meaning suddenly. I'm sorry.
No matter how they're
I'm being a
perceived by
dick
the
again.
entities therein, will always be permanently connected to specific points in the material reality. From a mortal point of view, we are only able to view those events in a specific order, because we're constrained by the laws that govern the material realm, but in the warp, they can be perceived and visited in any order. How malleable any of this is, how much you could truly alter time, is very unclear. Have all events and actions already occurred? Are
Yeah,
mortal
probably.
figures simply just playing them out over and over again? Can individuals within the warp and the material realm truly have an impact on those events? Are some more easily able to be shifted? And does the slightest movement of one create a chain effect of entanglement that would lead to unknown, disastrous consequences?
Yeah,
Who
no.
can really say? We will continue in part 2, where we'll learn about the origins of the galaxy and the war in heaven and its implications. We'll also learn in detail about Eldar mythology, which has a heavy bearing on much of this. Finally, in part 3, we'll pull all of these various factors together to make conclusions. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon in part 2.
Thank you, Luetin. Thank you a lot. Yeah, that was probably one of my longest videos ever. And thanks for recommending this. And yeah, I'm sorry I didn't put it out sooner because, as you know, my daughters they need their attention as they did today again. And these long videos are pretty straining on because I have to concentrate a lot. And like it's probably don't know how long this one is. It might be 2 to 3 hours long, and you know that's long. So I hope some of you are still here. I have to admit, though, he could have shortened this by half. Like, he talked about the same stuff all over in the middle. And again, I will just interpret it well-intentioned. So I think he just didn't know the meaning of the words he used sometimes, like linear, paradoxical. He didn't know that. And I think he did use the argument of authority a bit too often. And I know he, like, to my mind, he used it twice. He once used it in the reconstructed argument he had for causality, where he did not reflect on the single points, he just gave them. And point 3 was clearly from at least relativistic or higher like physics perspective wrong. So he couldn't draw the conclusion. And then he used the free will argument also by authority. Yes, there were philosophers, they said that. Okay, what do you mean by that? His use of terms was a bit imprecise, as I said. I would have liked him to define more stuff more clearly, and I would have liked him to use more illustrations, though the ones he used were cool. They were very good. And he did grasp some things very well, but there were some things where I just have to say, we know more. Like it was a bit outdated stuff. But I always had the feeling he really read himself into this. I liked that. And I felt that he really put a lot of passion into this. But I also felt in the end, he just wanted to, like, his main argument was, if it is like this, I don't like it. And that is nothing where I'm like, yes, that is fine. You don't like it. But the evidence points towards it. So please, then, like, jump over your shadow. Yes, you don't like it, but it's the case. Like, you have to work with it now. And I think this, he doesn't like predestination, really stopped him from giving more benefit of the doubt to some of the things, or to try to, like, as I said, for me, the evidence he presented now made me pretty sure I know what the warp and the materium connection is, at least in the main part. And I think it's pretty clear and relatively easy. Like, you need some visualizations a bit, but I think it's pretty simply put in the end. And I did not get the feeling after this video, if I wouldn't have known physics and relativity and philosophy as well, and psychology, I am lucky that I am pretty good in those 3 disciplines, and 2 of them are my job. So I know that probably most people might not have gotten that. Perhaps I also am not giving most people credit. I probably am not. It's very hard to gauge what people who are not as deep in these fields as I am think. So let me know in the comments if you thought you watched this video and you were like, yeah, I agree with all he says. But to me, it was a layman video, like, and that's not bad. Like, I like that people try to get into these things, and I like that he put this much work into it. Though from a more expertish view, I would say he did some stuff very fuzzily, and that like dragged it down a bit what he wanted to say. But that's fine. Like, it was a long video, and it's hard to write these things concisely from point A to point B or whatever you say. That's probably not the right saying. And yes, like I said, like, you need to understand physics because you need to understand what relativity is, what time is, that it is not like, and what linear is as well. Like, he used linear, not like, he thought it meant one line. It's one line in one direction. That's not what linear is. Linear, like, as I said, it is like also equidistant things, like something proportional. That's what linear means in physics. And that is what in physics you think about when you talk about linear time. You are talking about every hour is the same, every minute is the same. In relativistic time, 1 hour can be 2 hours in another time frame. And then it's not linear anymore. Like, it's dilated. So he didn't know that. You know, it's fine. Of course he didn't. But that's one of the things that like was at the core of his arguments, and it made it a bit hard to follow sometimes, or made the arguments not make as much sense as I think he thought they did. So very precise use of word though. Then the philosophy thing, his argument reconstruction, it was good that he put it there, like that. I felt that he like really dug into it, because that's what you do. You try to put these arguments and then show why these premises lead to this conclusion. But you have to also make arguments for the premises being true, and he did not do that, which again, I felt that he did not have philosophy training, I think, or he didn't think it was important. And then the psychological thing, which he actually did very well, like with the subconsciousness. And yeah, I talked about that as well in the video, but that also was a part of it, subconsciousness and consciousness and their interactions, especially with free will as well. So can't wait to hear your reactions if anyone watched it this far. Yeah, again, sorry that I didn't put out a video. I don't know when the next one will drop either. If it's a like half an hour video I can react to, I can do that one evening. That's no problem. But like 1 hour or 2 hours like this, like you see, I record 4 hours, and now it's, oh God, you know how late it is. I have to go to work tomorrow. You know, this is like very very at my limits, these very long ones. So yeah, I will do my best though. But yeah, I hope this was of any use to you, and you at least got something, and I made a bit of sense, because I don't know if I made sense. Seriously, I don't. I tried my best to try to be clear, but I'm not a native speaker, and I'm doing this like off the cuff. Like, I didn't prepare anything, as you obviously not, because of the supplied reaction. So I might not have made any sense. Tell me if some of the stuff made sense. And I would love to discuss this, like, because this is something where you have to discuss the intricacies face to face, I think. Perhaps one day we can do a live chat about this or something, and we at least try to talk about it a bit, and then I can put up paint and draw some stuff there or something. Anyway, take care of yourself as always, and if you're still here, don't forget to like and subscribe, because, man, if you're still here, you probably liked it as so much that you at least would perhaps consider supporting me. And yeah, of course, subscribe if you like this, as well, comment, and I will see you soon. Take care of yourself, as always. Take care of yourself. And again, kudos to Luetin for doing this. Thank you so much for this. Even though I shat around a bit in this one, but I'm honest, I will give you my opinions. And this was my opinion. Take care of yourself. Bye. Also, if you want to support my horror content, check out Volume 1 of my horror series called Remnants of the Old Truth, which is available for free as an audiobook on Vidith22's horror channel. Link is pinned in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.